If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 21, Collapse. Halfway down the cave, Cassian stopped. The strange hum was louder now. He tilted his head, straining to catch something, anything. Words, maybe. A whisper. Barely there. Or just the wind being dramatic again. He took a glance behind. Bathsheba stood silent, but there was something in the way she held herself, too still, like a painting trying too hard. He shook his head. Tension. Probably just tension. He took the lead. A lantern bobbed in the dark, revealing walls slick with dew. Water dripped in random rhythms, echoing like distant footsteps. Bathsheba's steps followed. When he paused to study an inscription, she crouched beside him. "These aren't Norse, are they?" she murmured. "They predate Proto-Germanic." He raised a brow. "Ah. So we are in the no one has any idea what these mean category." "No, they are older," she said, frowning but certain. He kept his questions to himself. At the tunnel's end, a stone slab blocked their path. Cassian got up on his feet with a groan that would make all fathers proud, and pressed his palm to its cool surface. It trembled under his touch. Bathsheba crouched beside him and traced the serpent rune carved at its center. "No tool could carve this so cleanly," she said, her brow furrowing even further. Cassian agreed and lifted his wand. Runes weren't just random carvings or ink symbols, they were acts of magic in themselves. To create one, you had to channel power through your hand as you etched or drew, weaving it into the lines and curves until the shape became more than art. That was why wizards still clung to their quills and ink. A pen couldn't channel magic. Even the simplest rune demanded precision and intent, or it would unravel. But the rune before him was something else entirely. The serpent's coils were so intricate it looked alive, scales overlapping in impossible detail, its glassy eyes catching the light of the lantern. Yet it wasn't an illusion or a painting, it was a true rune, dormant but perfect. This wasn't mere craftsmanship. It was the work of someone with an almost fanatical control over magic, so perfectly carved it shouldn't even be possible. Bathsheba murmured a charm Cassian didn't recognize, it was foreign, fluid, and certainly not Latin. He blinked, startled, as a lattice of silver light spread across the stone slab. Cassian frowned. "What was that? I never heard." The light flared. The slab groaned and slid sideways, revealing a narrow passage lit by moss that glowed like embers. Bathsheba didn't answer at first. She just stepped aside. Cassian followed, still puzzled. He wasn't exactly gifted with magic, and Bathsheba spoke more languages than he could name. Whatever the spell had been, it worked, and that was enough. "After you," Bathsheba said with a smile, the same curve of her lips. He slipped through first, the passage's rough floor falling away at a sharp angle. The dank air tasted of earth and distant sea. Here, the runes grew sharper, deeper, as if carved yesterday. He paused to memorize a pattern that looked almost alphabetic. She crouched beside him and sketched it on parchment. The corridor opened into a circular chamber farther ahead. The walls were marked with rings, each one circling inward toward a dark center. Every stone was carved, the edges rough beneath his fingertips. Far overhead, the ceiling curved into shadow. The chamber felt both empty and full at once. In the very middle, a pit yawned wide enough to swallow lantern light. The floor felt hollow. Like it was going all the way to the center of earth. Cassian crouched at its lip and angled his lantern beam into the void. The flame died the instant it touched the darkness, snuffed out like a candle in a storm. His heartbeat roared in his ears. He licked his lips. "Well, that isn't ominous at all." Bathsheba stepped up beside him. "I thought you would say that." Her voice echoed oddly, distant like it had bounced off too many stones before reaching him. Cassian turned to her, catching Bathsheba's eyes, and froze. He knew those eyes. He had seen those eyes before. A chill crept up his spine. For a single, suspended second, neither of them moved. The lantern's glow quivered across her face, and there, etched faintly on her cheek were runic scars that hadn't been there a minute ago. He felt sudden chill down his spine. His breath hitched. No, that couldn't be right. He shook his head hard, as if to scatter the image, and when he looked again, the marks were gone. Nothing but smooth, unmarked skin in the flickering light. He blinked rapidly, his stomach twisting. It is the lantern. Shadows playing tricks. The light was bouncing off the stone walls, distorting everything. Lantern tricks, he muttered under his breath. It had to be. Should have brought better lighting. Forcing his legs to move, Cassian stepped closer to the pit's edge. His voice came out quieter than intended. Shall we see what is down there? She pressed her palm to his forearm. Don't go down. It is dangerous, she said, clenching hard. He straightened, threw the hood off his head. How do you know? He asked, meeting her eyes. She ran a fingertip along her own palm and shook her head. Please, she said, her tone was hesitant, as if even she didn't know how she knew. Let's not go down. Cassian nodded, forcing himself to look away from her as he stepped back. We should head back, he said. But we need to warn the others first. She tucked her wand back into its sheath at her belt. We will warn them, she replied. If they still want to enter, it is their decision. Fair enough. Let's move. He frowned but stepped back, guiding Bathsheba along the spiral corridor towards the mouth of the cave. Not more than a few breaths later, a low rumble rolled through the tunnel. It began as a tremor underfoot, an odd shudder that made loose pebbles skitter across the floor. Cassian was taken aback, his stomach knotting. The lantern swayed, its light dancing across the walls. Whatever enchantment kept these carvings so pristine was awakening. He braced himself against the damp wall and swung around. Bathsheba's expression was tight. Before she could speak, the ground shivered again, harder this time. Stone cracked high above. He grabbed her elbow and pulled her back. A slab of roof rock broke free with a jagged crack. It fell, splitting the tunnel in half. Dust exploded around them. Cassian yanked Bathsheba aside, pressing her against the cool stone just as the chamber folded inward behind them. The walls moved as though alive, crushing the runic walls in. Bathsheba was hunched low, one knee to the ground, shielded by his arm. Blasted magic, she muttered, coughing up dust. That seal was never meant to stay open once we poked around. She flicked up a protego shield as they stumbled toward the cave mouth, the walls rattling behind them. Cassian stretched his hand, whispered the same charm, but nothing happened. Of course not. Bathsheba grabbed his arm and hauled him forward. Move, she snapped. Cassian swallowed, as he rushed out. A slab smashed down behind them. Bathsheba shoved Cassian ahead. Dust exploded in their faces. Move. Now. She cried again. The tunnel lurched again. Out. Cassian stumbled into daylight, falling to the ground. Bathsheba tumbled out after him. Others were already out. They escaped from the tunnel sooner than Cassian and Bathsheba, faces covered with dust. A half-dozen researchers walked closer. What on earth happened? Thierry Duval, a French rune master, asked, no demanded, eyes darting between Cassian and Bathsheba. He folded his arms, staring down. Cassian opened his mouth, ready with a quip about temperamental runes and faulty tunnels, but Bathsheba beat him to it. She brushed grit from her sleeve and met the man's glare head-on. We were examining the rune structure, she said. Then the roof came down on us. Examining. Duval repeated. You nearly got yourselves buried alive. Cassian opened his mouth to say, hey, I know that song. Right on. But Bathsheba beat him to it again, her lips twitching. We misjudged the ward's strength. She glanced at Cassian, who gave her an innocent smile. She cut him a warning look. He shut his mouth and instead touched his wand to a stone chip at his boot, rolling it with the tip. Sulking like a child. Bathsheba's gaze flicked down the shattered tunnel, then snapped back to Hilda, who was now on her feet. You all right? She asked. Hilda drew in a shuddering breath and ran a hand through her hair. I am, yes. And you? She replied, eyes wide. Bathsheba nodded with a smile. Good. She straightened. What happened to you in there? Hilda swallowed. She glanced at the cave mouth. I heard voices, she said. Her lips quivered. Whispers, at first. They sounded like someone beside me, telling me to keep tracing the runes. She shook her head as though to banish the memory. Then everything shook, and I must have blacked out. Cassian joined them. He offered Hilda a scrap of parchment and a quill. Can you write down what you heard? He said. Every detail. Hilda took them, fingers trembling. She began to scratch words in pale ink. A voice, urging me forward. Yrsa, come to me, the spiral binds us. Cassian furrowed his brow. Yrsa, he murmured, almost to himself. Hilda looked up. Does that mean anything? He shook his head, laughing awkwardly. Not sure. Probably a name, or a very bad omen. Hilda gave a nod, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I don't remember anything else. Sorry for worrying you. Bathsheba leaned over, patting Hilda's shoulder with a smile. It is all fine. Too bad the cave caved. Cassian rolled his eyes, stifling a grin. He made a mental note to mock her about that later. Instead, he turned back to the scrap of parchment. Yrsa. He murmured, tapping the quill against his palm. Does anyone else recognize that? Thierry Duval, arms still folded, huffed. Sounds Norse, perhaps a mythic figure. But I would expect something older here. Cassian held up a finger. Norse myth, you say? Yrsa was a queen in the sagas, daughter of Helga, mother of Halfdan. But that is way after Proto-Germanic. He shot a look at Bathsheba. Feels like someone, or something, is playing us. Chapter 22, almost a proper one. After the Norwegian researchers did a swift head count and confirmed no one else was trapped inside, they cordoned off the dig and sent a patroness straight to Oslo. Ministry boots were already on their way. Cassian and Bathsheba hung back, letting the experts take charge. When the last spell was cast, they turned and trudged toward their tents. Well, tents was generous. From the outside, they looked like storage tents on their third tour of duty. Inside, well, big. Wood panel floors gleaming as if polished daily, low tables scattered with runes and parchments, even a cozy hearth crackling away despite the chill. It felt less like camping and more like being swallowed by a miniature manor. Cassian wandered in circles, jaw slack. He counted oak beams. He tapped a window that overlooked the fjord, marveled at the woven tapestries, one showing a frost giant and a sea serpent locked in battle. None of this was fieldwork shabby. This wasn't camping, it was an aristocrat's fever dream stuffed into canvas. You look like a farm boy seeing his first chandelier, Bathsheba said, stepping inside with her arms folded. He paused, can't say as I have. He glanced at her, she shook her head with a smile. Well, he added, not one that looks like it is waiting for the Dowager Countess to host tea. She gave a snort. Right. Not like this. She shrugged off her coat and draped it over a chair. You've been out of the family bubble for too long. Cassian's lips twitched. He was waiting a chance to tease her back, but he bit it off. Instead he walked to a shelf stacked with tomes, ran a finger over the spines. Nice touch with the mini library, he said. I might pinch a volume later. Bathsheba raised an eyebrow. Help yourself. Just don't wreck the bindings. He looked around, then dropped one volume carefully into his robe pocket with a snicker. Bathsheba watched him, expression softening. Settling in. Cassian leaned back. It is odd, he said. I half expected a soggy floor and leaky roof. This is a magic tent. You get spoiled quick. I admit, I am impressed. He tapped the table. You. Not off my list of surprises. Ministry always does a posh job when they back it. He nodded. Still, feels strange. Like we were kicked off the fieldwork and ended up in student accommodation. Bathsheba let out a dry laugh. Student accommodation? You would love a room like this in Hogsmeade. He laughed. I would pay double my salary. That sound I hear is you admitting you would miss civilization if I push you out into the wild. He held up a hand. Touché. But don't expect me to give up on a proper desk. Bathsheba walked around to sort a few things. You can borrow mine anytime. Careful there, I might take you up on that offer. He yawned, arms stretched wide like he was about to drop off somewhere for a quick nap, then slumped onto the bed with a satisfied grunt. He tugged his boots off. Just as he tossed the second to the floor, Bathsheba stepped closer. Cassian glanced up, raising an eyebrow. You were so brave in there. Her tone made him blink. It wasn't the words. It was the way she said them, like they weren't alone in a tent that pretended to be a country house, like they'd just come back from war and he saved a child from a grenade. Then her hand found his collar, and before he could make a quip about dramatic compliments, she kissed him. Not just a peck, either. It landed near the corner of his mouth. Cassian kissed back, but his brain was already taking notes like someone had just handed him a cursed scroll and a deadline. Not that he was protesting, no sir, let the record show he was entirely cooperative in this development, but Bathsheba usually needed a bottle of wine and a lunar eclipse before she would so much as let her hair down. This was new. Her mouth lingered near the corner of his, too close to brush off as an accident, not quite centered to call a proper kiss. He pulled back half an inch, eyes narrowing. Well, he said, throat dry, either I suffered a head injury and this is some sort of hallucination, or you just kissed me. Bathsheba didn't move away. Would you like a repeat, just to confirm? He blinked. You are being oddly forward. Not complaining, he added, pointing a finger vaguely in the air, just making sure you are still you. You weren't, I don't know, possessed by a rune goddess back there, right? Her smirk was annoyingly hers. What if I was? He sighed through his nose. Then she has excellent taste. She slapped his arm. Don't ruin the mood. I am just glad my boyfriend didn't run off the tunnel alone and actually dragged me with him. Cassian caught her hand before she could swat him again. Dragged you? If I remember right, you were the one who yanked us both through that collapsing death trap while I flailed around like a duffer who can't even cast Protego. Bathsheba leaned into him, cheek pressing against his chest. That was after I got myself together. He snorted. Right. After nearly getting turned into a pancake. I landed on my feet. You rolled down a slope and kicked me in the face. Still counts. She didn't move, didn't shift away or add anything clever. Just stayed there, curled into his side like she'd been doing it for years. Cassian blinked up at the ceiling beams and wondered briefly whether Yrsa the ghost goddess had knocked a few screws loose in both of them. Wasn't expecting today to end with ancient runes, collapsing tunnels, and a cuddle, he muttered. I left my planner back at home. Stop talking. Her voice was muffled against his robes. You talk too much when you are flustered. I am not flustered, he said, properly offended. You are babbling like a first year. He grinned. That is your last name. And I am open to taking it after we tie the knot. She glared. Seriously? He shrugged, already peeling a bit of fuzz off the blanket. Not like I am a fan of Rosier. Bathsheba narrowed her eyes. What, because they are all megalomaniacs with dark cloaks and superiority complexes? Cassian raised a finger. Don't forget the smug ancestral portraits. She laughed softly. You would make a dreadful babbling. He stretched out on the bed, one arm tucked behind his head. Excuse you. I would make a delightful babbling. Might even start wearing scarves indoors and refusing to answer questions unless they are phrased in iambic pentameter. You already dress like a divorced professor. He looked down at his socks. Divorced, maybe. Professor? Bold of you to assume I haven't been banned from at least 3 academic journals. She chuckled, shaking her head. Cassian tilted his head. So, he said, do I get a second kiss, or was that a fluke? Bathsheba didn't answer. Not with words. She leaned over and planted a quick one on his forehead. Cheeky, he muttered, rubbing the spot like it burned. I meant proper verification. For research purposes. Save it for the footnotes, Rosier. He was about to fire back when a faint thump echoed outside, distant, barely there, but enough to drag his ears toward the tent flap. He sat up. Bathsheba was already turning. Sadly, that wasn't wind. Cassian got up. Either another rune waking up or some poor sod tripped on a ward line. She moved to the door, paused. Hope it is not Hilda again. Don't jinx it, he said, pulling his boots back on with a grimace. I like my ankles uncollapsed, thanks. They stepped outside. The cold hit them like a slap, sharp and spiteful, as though the fjord itself bore a grudge. A few lanterns flickered near the dig site, but most of the tents were quiet, zipped tight. Only a few people were moving between the tents, hunched and muttering. Cassian spotted Duval by the main tent, arguing with a wiry woman in ministry robes. She sounded irritated. Cassian couldn't blame her. Duval had that effect on people. We are locking it down. I don't care if your research window ends in 2 weeks. Duval gestured toward the cliffs, visibly seething. There is a structure under there. Possibly pre-Neolithic. You can't expect me to walk away. Cassian muttered, Duval is about 3 decibels away from popping an artery. Bath's Haida rubbed her hands together to warm her fingers. Ministry is shutting it early. That is not a good sign. Another rumble rolled through the stone beneath their feet. Cassian shot a look at the cliffs. Still think we are dealing with a benign spiritual echo? He asked. Bath's Haida didn't reply. She just started walking. They passed Hilda near the ward line, her hands wrapped around a cup of something steaming. She looked pale again, but she gave them a warm nod. Any new whispers? Cassian asked. She shook her head. No. Just, the spiral. Still there. In my dreams. Lovely, he said. Sleep well. She didn't smile. They reached the edge of the wards, where two ministry officials were stringing fresh spell wire across the rock face. The tape shimmered faintly, pulsing every few seconds with protective enchantments. It was overkill. They both knew it. Cassian squinted toward the cave entrance. What was left of it, anyway? Two ministry officials were already striding their way, tall, cloaked, expressions set like they were pulled straight from a bureaucratic sketchbook. You were the two that were in the deep, right? The man asked, squinting against the wind. Cassian gave a nod. Depends. Are we in trouble? The woman beside him wasn't entertained. She just pointed at a tent pitched off to the far edge, away from the rest of the cluster. Please come with us. Bath's Haida didn't hesitate. Just turned and started walking like she was expecting this since the cave sealed itself shut. Cassian fell in beside her, glancing back toward the cliff, then at the others still milling near the collapsed entrance. Right then, he muttered. Off to get scolded by the magical equivalent of airport security. Chapter 23, Brain Drills. First of all, this chapter is a little shorter than intended because I didn't notice some repeating paragraphs in the drafts and published it that way. By the time I caught and fixed it, I had already moved on and published more chapters, meaning I couldn't easily adjust the length here. But fear not. I will make it up to you with another double chapter today. Aren't I generous? Secondly, why didn't Cassian and Bath's Haida use lumos and instead relied on a lantern? Well, think of it like this, you got 5% phone battery and a perfectly good flashlight. Which one do you use? In an unfamiliar situation, where a fellow scholar just screamed and dropped like a statue, they were keeping their wands ready to cast spells at a moment's notice. If they were using lumos and suddenly had to defend themselves, they would lose their only light source in the transition. So I thought, it was better to have a free hand, a steady light, and a wand ready to respond. Dash. They passed a cluster of researchers, all doing a poor job of pretending not to watch. The ministry tent's cold lamplight, joyless chairs, a little desk pushed into the corner. A heating charm barely masked the chill that crept in through the canvas. The two officials followed them inside, closing the flap behind. The woman pulled out a quill that looked like it had been plucked from a particularly disgruntled crow and set it to a long scroll already half filled with notes. The man dropped into a chair, crossed one leg over the other. State your names. Cassian Rosier. Bath's Haida babbling. He scratched both names down without looking up. Have you discovered anything? Cassian shrugged lightly. Depends. Are you the sort of people who get excited about prelinguistic runic systems? He scratched his neck, eyes narrowing. But yes. The man blinked. Yes. Very yes, Cassian said. Found a spiral formation of runes inside the cave. Not Norse. Not Elder Futhark. Not even something you would get out of a misaligned decoding rune. It is old. Proper old. Possibly pre-agricultural, and certainly nothing the ministry's textbook writers have seen. The woman finally looked up from the scroll. Her quill stopped scratching. You are suggesting you uncovered a new language. I am suggesting someone should get a shovel and start digging through the Department of Mysteries' discarded bins. Because whatever is down there predates the Saxons, the Druids, the whole lot. This wasn't a burial mound or a carved hall. This was something else entirely. Bath's Haida didn't say anything. She sat with her hands folded and eyes fixed on the edge of the desk like she was waiting for someone to argue with him. The man drummed his fingers against the parchment. And the collapse? Caused by interacting with the runes, most likely. Or perhaps the entire chamber deciding it didn't want visitors. Either way, there were structural shifts tied to magical response patterns. Stone didn't just fall. It folded when it felt presence. The woman scribbled something. You are saying the cave closed itself. I am saying the cave was enchanted to lock behind anything sentient enough to understand what it was seeing. He glanced over at Bathsheba. I am also suggesting you don't dig anything else up before you are bloody sure you can handle what is in there. That wasn't just some broken shrine or enchanted tomb. It was alive. Still is, probably. And dangerous. That much I can guarantee. No one jumped to fill the silence. The woman jotted something again. Do you believe it is a sentient entity? The man asked. Cassian tilted his head. Well, it didn't offer me tea, but it did try to collapse a tunnel on our heads. So, unless that is your idea of a friendly hello. The man frowned. You are saying you were targeted. I am saying it wasn't random. Cassian shifted back in the chair. We weren't in there 5 seconds before the runes flared and the tunnel started folding. Not crumbling, folding. Like someone was trying to shut a door. Or a mouth. The woman's eyes finally rose. And this entity, you think it is bound to the site? Bound, buried, or just bored and cranky after a few thousand years? Take your pick. He tapped his temple. But Hilda touched that stone, and it gave her a memory that wasn't hers. The man glanced at Bathsheba. I saw what it did to Ms. Vogel, she said. And I saw the runes. Clean. Too clean. She scratched her thumb over her knuckle. They didn't belong to anything in the archives. They left the tent after laying everything out. What they'd seen, what they touched, even sketches of the runes and that serpent symbol by the pit. A third official came in halfway through, didn't say a word, just nodded and began drawing a floor plan while Cassian and Bathsheba gave him details. Rock formations, slope angle, the pit's width, he copied it all down with the grim focus of someone planning a warding ritual or a tactical siege. Maybe both. Then came the bit that made Cassian's neck prickle. Near the end, one of them hinted, very politely, that a memory extraction might help confirm things. Bathsheba furrowed her brows like she didn't quite understand the question. Cassian, meanwhile, blinked like they just asked to borrow his spleen for a weekend getaway. No need, Bathsheba had said, crisp and smooth. We wrote it all down. Cassian just nodded along, trying not to look like he was thinking too hard about that particular phrase, memory extraction. They stepped out into the cold again. Cassian tugged his cloak tighter, like someone asked if they could probe him, and glanced sidelong. He blinked at her, mouth half open. Magic can do that. She chuckled, brushing hair back from her cheek. I love when you act all silly like these are new inventions. He shut his mouth fast, tried for a smirk like he'd been joking all along. Right. Course. I knew that. Inside, he was screaming. What else could they do? Flip through your dreams like a catalog? Rewrite your childhood so you thought you liked parsnips? He kept walking, but his brain was on full sprint. If they asked for his memories. God, he wouldn't have had a clue how to fake it. Would they have seen through it? Seen him? He needed to learn more. Fast. Memory magic, whatever it took. No way he was going to end up in a ministry cell because he didn't know which end of a brain drill was up. They slipped into their tent, blessedly warm, still smelling of burnt pine and old paper. Cassian dropped onto the nearest chair, eyes flicking to the bookshelf, then to the empty desk where he could already imagine a stack of research books waiting for him. Memory magics. Runes. Yirsa. All of it. 2 days later, the ministry gave up pretending this was a normal dig and slapped wards all over the cave mouth like plasters on a leaky pipe. Officially, the site was sealed for safety and future study. Unofficially, it was a magical hazard zone with too many questions and not enough people willing to answer them. The researchers packed half their things and moped. The ministry dragged in more grey-robed bureaucrats and didn't share their tea. Cassian, meanwhile, had zero intention of returning to England just to sit in Rosier Manor and watch his uncle reorganize cursed family portraits. And Bathsheba, to her credit, didn't have any reason to rush back either. She scheduled the next few weeks at the rune site and wasn't about to trade Frostbite for a staff meeting at Hogwarts. So, without actually saying it, they agreed to stay. Not quite a holiday. Definitely not work. Something in between. A field trip gone rogue. Taking a porte-clés back to Oslo felt like getting yanked through a washing machine full of regret and frost. The battered old shoe hadn't improved on the old suitcase. This tool smelled like mothballs and wet socks, still flared to life with that bone-deep pull that made your insides think gravity was just a polite suggestion. Cassian landed boots first on the ministry's designated Port KF field just outside the city. The air was windy again, colder here than it had any right to be in June. Beside him, Bathsheba straightened, again, unflappable. She brushed her shoulders off. Right. Back where we started. Right, Cassian muttered, brushing his hair back into something vaguely human. That was charming. They didn't dawdle. The local officials gave them a knot and a folder full of "keep quiet and don't get cursed" notices. Cassian schemed it, then handed it back without comment. From there, it was a short hop through one of those grumpy apparition gates Scandinavians used instead of flew, and just like that, they were in the heart of Oslo proper. Cassian glanced up at the neat stone buildings, the steepled roofs, the tiny cars trundling past like beetles on wheels. Why do we taste ash every time we travel? We can use this magic back home instead, he muttered. Bathsheba rolled her eyes. Good luck trying to convince wizards back home. They are as stubborn as mules. Won't consider anything new unless it comes with 3 ministry seals and a scandal. He snorted. Right. Can't have the Flog powder lobby losing business. The two travelled from Oslo to Bergen, and from there to the coast. Cassian claimed it was historical context. Bathsheba called it procrastination with boots on. They boarded the train like two scholars trying to pretend they hadn't nearly been crushed beneath a pile of prehistoric ruins. On the way to the train, Bathsheba had fled the underground 2 stops in, swearing never again. Now she sat opposite Cassian, gripping the seat like it might vanish beneath her. Cassian was still laughing. You are telling me this is a scholarly detour? She asked, after making sure the speeding tube wouldn't kill her. Cassian leaned on the window frame. It is important field work, he said solemnly. To experience Norse maritime trade routes in a fully immersive, fish-scented way. You just wanted to eat fish stew while pretending to be a Viking, admit it. Both are legitimate scholarly pursuits, he said, deadpan. I will cite myself in the footnotes. The train rolled along the coast. Chapter 24, Fjords. Fjords sliced through rock like someone had taken a giant butter knife to the earth. Villages clung to the cliffs, all red roofs and silent windows, reminding how they just missed a Viking raid by a few centuries. Cassian pressed a palm to the glass, tracking the curl of a river below. Imagine rowing that upstream with 20 lads, 2 barrels of mead, and a goat you stole from a rival clan. Bathsheba didn't look up. I imagine it daily. Their arrival at the coast involved far too many stairs, a port that smelt salted fish and magic residue, and a boat Cassian was fairly sure had once been a fishing vessel and only recently decided to become a tourist trap. A wiry old man handed them both life vests with no sense of irony. Wand won't help if you go overboard, he said cheerfully, gesturing to the choppy grey water. Cassian raised an eyebrow. Is that from experience? The man just winked. They took the boat west, toward the fjords where the guide insisted something very old had once lived. Possibly a frost troll. Possibly a sea witch. Possibly both, depending on who you asked. One old lady even swore they were lovers. Cassian stood at the bow, scarf snapping dramatically, one hand braced on his hip, a man auditioning for the cover of Wizards and Waves, a heroic saga. They met a pair of local scholars on the second evening. They were camped near a rock formation known to whisper in winter, which apparently meant it was either haunted or acoustically fascinating. Cassian, predictably, was delighted. It is always trolls, isn't it? He said, arms crossed as they stood beside a fire pit ringed in runes. If there is a rock, it is a troll. If there is mist, it is a troll hiding. If your gran stubs her toe on a root, troll. The beardy one, Ivor, nodded, probably believing that was a valid cosmological stance. Because they are there. You can't always see them. But they see you. Cassian gave him a thoughtful look. That is comforting. The other one, Torkel, was flipping through a leather-bound book, fully expecting it might suddenly sprout something useful. These formations, though. It doesn't match known stave designs. Could be tied to the older earth bindings, the pre-Asir cults. Cassian perked up. The Jotun cults. Torkel blinked. You know about those. Bathsheba, perched on a cold boulder with a mug of something that smelled cinnamon, raised an eyebrow. Of course he does. He's been moving around quoting Norse sagas like it is bedtime hour. I mean, Cassian said, lifting his chin, I may have read a thing or two. She squinted. Where? He froze just long enough to be suspicious. Obscure texts. Obscure. He looked up at the sky hoping clouds might offer assistance. You know. Old manuscripts. Lost to time. Possibly published by Stan Lee. He couldn't say Marvel, right? Right? But that didn't stop his brain from chucking the name in the suggestion box anyway. He stared at the stars, half expecting the old man to peer down and wink. Wait, he was probably still alive. No, did Harry Potter world have Stan Lee or Marvel? Still. It wasn't like he was quoting Shakespeare. Norse myth was messy enough that you could probably slip in a superhero origin story and no one would bat an eye. Especially not out here, surrounded by rune-whispering boulders and people who would nod solemnly if you claimed frost trolls had favorite songs. But he wasn't even sure if half of his Norse knowledge counted as myth or memoir. Back on Earth, it had all been jumbled anyway. Legends bleeding into each other, gods rebranded across regions, scholars squabbling over whether Odin was a skyfather or a wandering mushroom hallucination. Still, this world had Merlin. Real Merlin. Trolls, too. So if the Norse gods turned out to be just ancient wizards flinging weather magic and carving their names into rocks, he wouldn't be shocked. Though locals thought them ancient sorcerers, most agreed they were real. Not gods exactly. Just powerful. Wizards with a flair for the theatrical. Vikings were mostly remembered as brawlers with enchanted axes and a preference for fireballs over diplomacy. Battle mages, really, stomping across Europe with rune-carved weapons and enough charm to start a religion or two. As for their gods, Odin, Thor, the whole lot, they weren't gods so much as the Merlin types of their time. Famous, terrifying, a bit mad. Glorified founders, really. Legends, yes. But gods? Not likely. Well, all in all, Cassian was rather pleased with himself. He managed to quote 2 sagas, reference 3 obscure cults, and though no one had acknowledged it, probably impressed Bathsheba enough to score a second kiss if the mood swung in his favor. Academic swagger, achieved. They stuck around Norway a few weeks longer since she scheduled to stay there as long as a few weeks, and Cassian would rather be anywhere else but back at home. Ostensibly for research, though Cassian suspected most of it was just Bathsheba wanting to see if the Whispering Rocks really did recite poems in winter. He wasn't about to complain. Any excuse to wander fjords and dig through old magic suited him just fine. But then the day came. Return day. Hell day. Home. They didn't say it out loud, but both looked at the porte-clés with the same weary resignation most people saved for family dinners or overdue ministry paperwork. It still smelled faintly of mildew. Probably cursed, if they ever got around to checking. The old towel flapped, and Cassian muttered something unpleasant under his breath as the familiar yank hit. Time went sideways. Then vertical. Then meaningless. He landed in Britain with Bathsheba appearing beside him, steady as ever. She brushed a curl from her face, looked around, and sighed. Well, that was fun while it lasted. Cassian adjusted his coat collar. Didn't even give us a souvenir. Just bruised shins and frostbite. They walked into the ministry office, already tired. A squat little wizard at the desk looked up, gave them the once-over, and waved a wand that made a faint ding. Name please. Cassian Rosier. Avoiding frostbite. Bathsheba babbling, she said, stepping beside him. Same. The man gave a tight nod and scribbled something on a floating slip. Hand over your wand please. Just routine checks, he muttered. Nothing to fuss over. Cassian offered his wand, brows up. She is clean. Didn't bite anyone. Only exploded once. The man didn't entertain him with a response. Waved his wand, muttered spell, and then a squint at the readout rolled out of Cassian's wand. Last spells were he leaned closer, brow wrinkling. Lumos. Only Lumos. Cassian gave a shrug that implied he'd just been caught sneaking biscuits from the staff room. I like to keep things bright. The man didn't look convinced. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if the spell record might somehow be encoded with sarcasm. The wand beeped again, annoyed at being doubted. A long pause. Then, any particular reason you cast the same basic illumination charm, 42 times? Cassian tilted his head. Have you ever tried finding your socks in a magically pitch-black tent? It is either Lumos or trip over your own dignity. Bathsheba stepped in before the poor ministry wizard could continue mentally auditing Cassian's wand for further crimes. He is not very good at spells, she said, voice tired but polite. Would you like to check mine instead? The man gave her a once-over. Whatever suspicion he aimed at Cassian, it didn't follow her. His wand glowed again as he waved it over hers. Expulso, Protego, Detection Charm, Lumos, again Lumos. Flame Freezing Charm. Bathsheba nodded. For the fire. Pit wouldn't stay lit otherwise. The wand gave a soft ping and dimmed. He just nodded, apparently satisfied. Right. All in order. He passed their wands back, but his colleague, tall, square-jawed, stepped forward. Just a quick face-to-face verification, he said. To confirm no polyjuice. Cassian raised his eyebrows. Who in their right mind would impersonate me? Have you met me? The man stared. Cassian sighed. Fine. Let's make sure I haven't been replaced by a cunning impostor with better cheekbones. A dull gold glow passed over his face, flickered, and went out. The man grunted again, waved to Bathsheba, who held still while the same light passed over her. No alarms. No flashing red sparks. The officials seemed mildly disappointed. They debriefed their research, if you could call it that. There wasn't much to report unless the ministry wanted a full catalogue of nearly died moments and romantic tension beside an eldritch pit. The official summary was, site collapsed, cave sealed, runes unstable, and nothing retrieved. They both sat through it, tired, a bit dusty, giving statements that read like two students explaining why the potions lab caught fire. Cassian told the truth, mostly, and only leaned on sarcasm when asked whether he interacted with any entities of unknown origin. If you are asking if I poked the spooky stone, then yes. Happily. I would do it again. The poor scribe didn't know whether to laugh or put it in bold. Once the ministry had wrung every drop of useful detail from them, and a few unhelpful ones, they were cleared to go. They stepped outside. Bathsheba took his hand without looking at him. You sure you want to go back? He glanced at her, then past her, and beyond that, home. Or whatever Rosier Manor was supposed to be. I don't want to, he said, and didn't bother pretending otherwise. But I have to. Chapter 25, Brand. Bathsheba just held onto him and they landed a few meters from Rosier Manor's outer gates, just shy of the wards. Cassian cleared his throat. Well. Back to the ancestral snake pit. Bathsheba raised an eyebrow. Want me to walk you to the door? What, so the ancestral portraits can gossip about the scandalous Norwegian mistress who clearly bewitched me? Her lip twitched. Might improve your reputation. Not hard, he said. Last I checked, I am ranked just below the cursed tea set and a whisker above the uncle who tried to taxidermy a hippogriff for Christmas. She gave a soft huff but didn't move away. He looked at her properly then, a curl escaping her bun. Familiar things. Lately too familiar. Thanks, he said. For not letting me get pancaked by ancient sealing stones. Her eyes didn't shift. You would have done the same. Sure, he said. After screaming and probably fainting. She tilted her head. You think you didn't scream? No, he said. I know I screamed. Just, internally. Like a dignified adult. Her hand rose, brushing the lapel of his coat. You will be all right. Define all right. If you mean I will survive another awkward dinner where someone tries to quiz me on bloodline politics over roast lamb, then yes. She laughed and slapped his arm. Cassian caught her waist with one hand, steadying her before she tipped over from the momentum. She didn't pull away. Her eyes fluttered shut. He leaned in and kissed the edge of her mouth. She grinned. She pressed the side of her face to his, breath catching against his cheek. Revenge. She murmured. Justice, he said, and maybe a little revenge. She pinched his arm. Hard. He yelped and jerked back, nearly stepping on the cursed ward stone behind him. Bloody. You witch. She just smiled sweetly, lips still curved, eyes far too smug. Then, without so much as a warning, she twisted on the spot. Apparition snapped across the quiet hillside like a whip, and she vanished. Cassian stood there for a second, hand still half lifted like he'd been planning to say something clever. Then lowered it. He had a mim for that. He exhaled through his nose and turned toward the house. Rosier Manor loomed up through the mist like it always did, stern, gothic, and dramatically oversized, the kind of place that looked like it demanded silence and polished shoes. The gates opened with a metallic groan, as if offended by his return. The gravel path under his boots had a way of reminding him that every inch of this place had been built to impress, to intimidate, to remind lesser bloodlines that they weren't welcome. Cassian wasn't sure he was welcome either. By the time he reached the front steps, the wards had already reported his presence. The massive iron-banded doors creaked open of their own accord, spilling warm. The scent hit like it always did, firewood, old parchment and the ghost of some ancestor's disapproval. Inside, the hall was exactly the same. Of course it was. He doubted a single sconce had shifted since the second coming. The portraits on the walls watched with the usual disdain and poorly disguised nosiness. "Welcome back, Master Rosier," came a voice, then a sharp crack. Towel appeared a few feet ahead, not looking up from the ground. Cassian smiled. "Still in one piece, I see." The elf's eyes darted up, then down. "Yes, Master Rosier." Not trembling. Not flinching. Not sprinting for the nearest exit. That alone felt like progress. Cassian crouched a little to match his height. "How is the house?" Towel stared somewhere over his shoulder. "As usual, Master Rosier." "Which means it is still a shithole." He stood with a grunt. "Lovely. I will be in my room, getting presentable for the Grand Inquisition." Towel bowed. "Shall I bring hot water, sir?" "Please. And something strong enough to drown the ghost of my dignity. By that I mean coffee, not alcohol." "Yes, Master Rosier." Another crack, and he was gone. Cassian sighed and took the long walk through the entrance hall. Towel was meticulous it seemed. His room, predictably, was untouched. Not a sock out of place, not a curtain askew. The bed sat like a throne nobody liked using. Books lined the shelves in perfect rows. He threw his coat across the footboard, tugged off his boots, and groaned as he stretched. His wand clattered onto the desk. The chair squeaked when he sat. Towel returned with a cup of coffee, bowl of steaming water and a clean towel folded like a formal letter. The knock came before he was halfway through changing. He froze, still one arm inside his shirt, and called out, "Yes." "Master Cassian," came Towel's voice again, hesitant this time. "Your father is expecting you in the study." Of course he bloody was. Cassian yanked the shirt the rest of the way on, buttoned it while glaring at the mirror, and smoothed his hair with damp fingers. Not perfect, but respectable enough not to be accused of rebellion. When he stepped into the study, Regulus didn't look up. Just flicked a hand toward the chair opposite, still buried in a thick folder of parchment. Cassian moved without rush and dropped into the chair. He didn't speak. No point. They both knew the script. His father would finish reading, sip something expensive, and then launch into the next chapter of How Not to Disgrace the Family Name, a Rosier memoir. Regulus turned a page. Focused like it wasn't a petty business report but a sacred text deciphering the fate of empires. Cassian just tapped his knee rhythmically. He wasn't uncomfortable. Hell, he had more awkward breakfasts. Finally, Regulus folded the folder closed, bound the binder tight, and leaned back. "You are back. Noticed that, did you?" The older man ignored the jibe. He reached for the decanter, poured himself a drink, amber liquid, no ice, slow pour. No offer for Cassian, of course. He then looked Cassian up and down, eyes sweeping once from collar to cuff. "What did you discover?" Cassian shrugged. "Nothing worth mentioning really. A cave full of angry runes, possibly older than agriculture, that collapsed before we could do anything. Regulus didn't raise to it. Yet you stayed for weeks." Cassian grinned, wide enough to show teeth. "Are you asking if I was evading home?" "I was just enjoying my summer." "In the far north?" Cassian nodded, folding one ankle over the other. "You know how it is. British weather made me allergic to Sunday." Regulus didn't return the smile. His glass hovered mid-air. "What are your intentions with that, Professor?" Cassian's jaw twitched, he forced it to ease before it could lock again. He slipped his hands into his pockets, curling into a fist. "That professor is an esteemed ancient rune expert. And my friend." Regulus's voice was terse. "She is a Mudblood sympathizer." Cassian didn't react. Just took a deep breath. The way a diver might before going under. "She is also smarter than half the Wisengamot, has 3 published translations of pre-standardized script, and saved my life in Norway. But sure, he said, tongue sharp, let's lead with slurs. Funny, you never spoke like that about our own. I am stating facts. He sat straighter. Then took another breath. Best not to look too eager for a row. Also allows me to blend in. She is reputable. Might come in handy long term, if things shift at Hogwarts. Regulus raised one brow like Cassian had dropped a dead bird on the table. I see, he said. No inflection. No verdict. He never gave the verdict right away. Cassian leaned forward, elbows on knees. You sent me there to make connections. I am making them. Just not the pure-blood campaign trail sort. Regulus reached for the decanter again. Still didn't offer. She is not one of us, he said at last. Cassian's brow arched. What does that even mean anymore? She is published. Tenured. The ministry consults her. You think a bloodline trumps that? It always has. Not in the classroom, Cassian said. Not when half your students would rather quote her than Caro. Regulus stared dead in his eyes, taking a slow sip. You sound like you admire her. I respect her, Cassian said. Which, for a Rosier, I realize is practically a confession. Regulus set his glass down. Is it a distraction? Cassian blinked. Is what? This entanglement? Cassian's laugh came sharper than intended. You mean is she keeping me from brainwashing the youth into goose-stepping Rosier foot soldiers? Regulus didn't rise. Watch your tongue. He raised hands. Just making sure I am following the script. Regulus studied him like a chess piece he hadn't decided whether to sacrifice or crown. You are still in your seat at Hogwarts, he said. Which means you are still useful. Don't mistake tolerance for approval. Cassian nodded. Yes, father. I am aware. You understand what is at stake, then, Regulus asked, returning to papers. Cassian cocked his head. The family legacy, my eternal usefulness, and the unspoken horror of me entangling with a reputable scholar with non-rosy blood. Yes. All accounted for. Regulus's eyes narrowed. You are still young enough to course-correct, he said, setting the glass down. If your interests begin interfering with the expectations of your post, you will yank the leash. Cassian's voice was light. Understood. Regulus straightened, steepling his fingers. Don't be flippant. I wouldn't dream of it. Cassian tapped his feet. You made it perfectly clear. Be useful. Stay useful. Don't embarrass the family brand. Trust me, father, I memorized the motto. It is not a brand. Oh no, heaven forbid we commercialize ancestral hubris. That would be undignified. You always had a sharp tongue, he said. It is a pity it took you this long to learn to point it somewhere useful. Cassian tilted his head, corner of his mouth curling. Didn't realize you were keeping a scoreboard. It is not a scoreboard, Regulus said evenly. It is a ledger. Scoreboards forgive. Ledgers don't. Cassian's smile sharpened. He wanted to snap back, say well, jot this down then. I've taught a year's worth of Hogwarts students to ask questions instead of swallowing propaganda. I've introduced half-bloods to primary source analysis, and I've had 3 Slytherins say they prefer history to defense, and convinced a Gryffindor to ask why before hexing first. If that doesn't count as progress, I don't know what does. But he knew he couldn't, instead he got up. Anything else, father? Was anything recovered? Cassian shook his head. Too risky. The ministry sealed it. They might unseal it later, when they have more curse breakers and fewer scruples. He waved a hand. Just don't fall. Know that she is a tool for you, nothing more. Cassian snorted. Sure, father. Always the dutiful Rosier, aren't I? He left the room without looking back. Chapter 26, Mind Magic. Rest of the summer passed in a slow, predictable crawl. Cassian kept to himself. He did the polite thing. Turned up to breakfast, nodded at the right relatives, spooned marmalade onto toast pretending he wasn't planning to throw himself into a cliff the next time someone mentioned blood purity. He let the jabs roll off. Rosier cousins circling like bored vultures, offering comments to be noticed but too polite to challenge. He smiled through it all, eyes glazed. Once that was over, he slipped into his room and shut the door. A neat stack of volumes waited. Legilimency here, occlumency there, dense theory, no hands-on guides, yet. Turned out these books weren't exactly available to the public. Perk of being a Rosier, though, entry to the kind of library most curse breakers had to bleed for. There were no safety sections. No tidy labels. Just walls of leather-bound tomes and the faint sense that something in the corner was breathing. He ran a hand down a shelf marked Cognitive Magics, secured, fingers brushing against spines with titles like The Mind's Looking Glass, The Art of Mental Shielding, and, somewhat worryingly, How to Break a Mind Without Leaving Bruises. Comforting stuff. He plucked the first two out and tucked them under one arm. Finally. Something useful. Something that didn't involve which Rosier cousin was courting whom or what granduncle had hexed which ministry owl for flying too low. Just clean, well-documented, ethically grey-mind magic. He slumped into the old armchair by the hearth in his room, legs half draped over the armrest, and cracked the first one open. About 6 pages in, he realized something important: this wasn't entry-level stuff. Legilimency wasn't just waving your wand and peeking into someone's head like rifling through their sock drawer. It was layered. Vicious. Personal. Occlumency was even worse. That was locking your own thoughts in a vault and daring someone to break in. And if they did, gods help them. Some of it involved breathing techniques, others, anchoring your thoughts so deep in memory that nothing could shake them. The real twist though, not everyone could even do it. You needed a particular talent, a kind of internal tuning fork. Magical aptitude. Psychic receptivity. Whatever you called it, this body didn't have it. Didn't matter how clever he was in his past life. No amount of reading dusty tablets or diagramming Proto-Sumerian epics prepared your brain for magical resonance. If anything, too much thinking got in the way. So he didn't try. Not seriously. No foolish experiments. No accidentally breaking into Towel's thoughts while asking for more bath water. He just studied. Learned what not to do. He filed that rule away with the rest. No staring contests, ever. Because eye contact, well, that was apparently a trap. Turns out, you stare at someone too long in this world, and you might end up broadcasting your deepest shame on the Hogwarts notice board. Or worse, if they knew what they were doing, they might go digging. That was when the memory hit him. A shiver ran up his spine, pulling him back. Snape. Dumbledore. Both of them. He looked them straight in the eye. Bath's Haida said something to him back in Norway. Somewhere between the rune pit and the ministry checklists, "This stuff is mad," he muttered once, scrawling a note in the margin that read, "Do not attempt on elf. Or self." Bath's Haida, who had just returned from arguing with a frost spiral about its symmetry, barely looked up from her cup of tea. "Of course it is mad. Why did you think no one teaches it casually?" Cassian raised a brow. "You say that like you speak from experience." She sipped. "Snape once tried to break into my head." His hand froze mid-turn on the page. "Sorry, what?" "Tried," she repeated. "Didn't succeed." Cassian blinked. "You dueled Snape? In your mind?" She lifted a shoulder. "We were both young and argumentative. He thought I was hiding something. I was. It wasn't his business." He stared. "Did he apologize?" Her smile at the time still sent shivers down Cassian's spine. "Oh, he regretted it all right." She said it as if she was discussing tea brands, but something in her eyes had shut the conversation down right there. He didn't ask again. Now, back in his room, shirt half-buttoned, sleeves rolled sloppily to the elbow, Cassian sat at his desk, tapping a quill against his jaw. The book on occlumency lay open beside him. He stopped reading 3 pages in. The thought wouldn't leave him. Snape and Dumbledore were legilimens. Not just rumoured, he knew. Well, she knew, and she didn't usually throw that kind of thing around unless it was true. He trusted her more than most books anyway. Which was saying something. So. Snape. Dumbledore. Both had looked him in the eye. And what did that mean? If they looked and really looked, right down to the scaffolding of his thoughts, surely they would have known. He wasn't Cassian Rosier. Not the original, anyway. His soul, or whatever counted for it, was borrowed. Imported. Slightly scorched on arrival, perhaps, but functioning. And if they'd seen that? Well. Dumbledore might have said nothing. Probably would have kept it as a nice trivia until he needed something from you. The man was about as readable as a locked tomb. Could stare into your soul and offer you a sherbet lemon in the same breath. But Snape? Snape didn't strike him as the type to sit quietly while a stranger walked around wearing a pure-blood skin like it was on sale at Madame Malkin's. If Snape had really seen it, there would have been wands, fire, maybe a pithy insult before something exploded. Cassian sat back, rubbing the heel of his palm over his eyes. Unless, he muttered, they didn't see anything at all. He pieced together a few theories a couple weeks later, after plowing through every book in the Rosier library that even sniffed in the direction of brain, soul, memory, or magic. He tore through titles. Warding the Self, Personal Memory in Magical Minds and the Thought Knot, Why You Can't Just Think Harder. Thrilling stuff, written by people who probably hadn't laughed in decades. First theory, his favorite because it was just plausible enough to be horrifying, his soul wasn't from this world, so the memories, his real ones, were stuck behind some kind of magical firewall. The body might be Rosier, but the soul definitely wasn't. Which meant the eyes weren't exactly the original model, and memory magic often worked through soul imprint recognition. No proper imprint? No access. Akin to trying to open a vault with someone else's fingerprint. Second, equally grim, but in a way that made him feel slightly more smug, that interface in his head, the thing that had first flared up when Lumos failed and then handed him Lumos Noctis like it was a Christmas gift, might be doing more than just feeding him spells. It was shielding him. Protecting its secrets, and by extension, protecting him. Maybe it was sentient. Maybe it just didn't fancy ministry dogs poking about. Either way, it knew what it was doing. He made a note. System equals magical condom for soul? Investigate further, never say this aloud. Ever. Third, he wasn't fully integrated. He dropped into this life like someone leaping onto a moving carriage. The original Cassian was mostly gone, sure, but maybe not entirely. Maybe the mind was stitched together at the seams, not blended. The soul wore the body like a decent suit, but sometimes, the sleeves didn't quite fit. If someone tried to dig around, say, Dumbledore with his damn twinkling gaze, they might just see static. Noise. Or worse, nothing at all. Fourth, and this one came to him after an unfortunate passage in a book titled Mirror of Memory, Reflections in the Pensieve, there was a chance the interface was subsuming memory. Not just protecting it. Absorbing, converting, flattening all his experiences into its own neat little index. Which meant anyone trying to pry into his head wouldn't get visions or emotions, they would get a system error. A blank field. Terrifying. The last theory was more desperate. Maybe his magic, his mind, the interface, whatever it was, all worked because it cheated. Like some ancient failsafe had latched onto the most viable vessel and made it work by force. That would explain the weird way knowledge arrived, someone slipping scrolls under a locked door. He threw the quill down. So either I am firewalled, fragmented, glitched, or possessed by a deeply opinionated magic relic. Not ideal. The books didn't give him answers so much as more interesting questions. Half of them contradicted each other anyway. One insisted the soul and the mind were interwoven, another swore they were parallel systems running off different magical currents. A third, written by someone who clearly enjoyed long walks through ego and absinthe, claimed every wizard carried three minds, the conscious, the subconscious, and the ancestral. Cassian threw that one across the room. Still, it left a few working rules. Avoid eye contact with known legilimens. Don't sleep near cursed artifacts. Never attempt to unlock soul memories unless you've written a will and made peace with reality coming apart. Solid advice, really. Cassian tilted his head back and stared at the ceiling. I've gone mad, he said to no one. Possibly brilliant. Definitely mad. Still, the pieces fit. If someone like Snape or Dumbledore had tried to break in, and gotten nothing but static, or worse, some kind of rebound, they would have backed off fast. Dumbledore especially. The man had enough secrets in his own skull without getting trapped in someone else's. He also learned that poking around in someone's mind without permission was very much a magical crime. More so if the someone in question was an heir. Even more if that heir had the kind of bloodline that made ministry officials twitch when you said their last name aloud in a public loo. Well, technically, Cassian was a pure-blood heir. His father was the current head of the most ancient and most noble house of Rosier, and even if Lucian was still top pick for the whole dark-robed legacy package, Cassian had a shot. A bad one. The sort you wouldn't put money on, but still, a shot. If everyone else died in a coordinated broom accident or had an allergic reaction to Muggleborns, the laws were clear, Cassian counted. Which meant, under British magical law, his mind was off limits. Ward it again, and God's help the poor sod who tried to peek without a formal duel and 3 signed forms. Not that it comforted him much. But maybe Snape and Dumbledore hadn't seen anything at all. Not because he was protected by some cosmic firewall or mystical system with a built-in no-peeking charm. Maybe they just didn't dare. Yes, that simple. Cassian sat back in his chair, arms folded, staring at the book, hoping it might confirm his suspicion. If what Bath's Hedda said was true, and it usually was, then any heir from a proper pure-blood family would have been drilled in occlumency from the time they could toddle over to a Pensieve. He hadn't been, of course. His idea of mental discipline was not shouting at the ceiling when books quoted themselves at him. But Snape and Dumbledore didn't know that. As far as they were concerned, Cassian Rosier might have had half a dozen defensive layers tucked behind those green eyes. Might have trapped them. Might have known they were there. And no Legilimens wanted to get caught rummaging through an heir's thoughts without permission. That sort of thing came with political fallout, and possibly a lawsuit. Or a duel. Or a very stern tea with Uncle Malfoy. So yeah, maybe they simply hadn't looked. Cassian chewed on that. Rolled it around in his head. It explained why they didn't act strange around him. Why Dumbledore's usual bird-watching gaze had stayed vague and polite. Why Snape, despite every reason to hex him on sight, had mostly stuck to contempt and long pauses. Maybe they were scared to peek. It was better than alternative. He cracked the spine of the book in front of him, The Art of Mental Shielding, and flipped to a chapter titled False Fortresses, When Bluffing is Protection Enough. It was underlined in 2 colors, one of which was definitely blood. Cassian drummed his fingers on the desk. He considered testing the theory, asking someone to dig into his head just to see what happened. But that kind of thing didn't come with a refund policy. Best case, someone confirmed his tangle of theories. Worst case, they went snooping, saw too much, and he ended up explaining Bitcoin to the Wisengamot while being held under suspicion of mind crimes. Even if it worked, even if everything he read was right, he would still be left with 5 contradictory theories and no clean proof. It was no different than asking a cave full of ancient runes if they were friendly. You might get a vision, or a ceiling dropped on your face. Cassian wasn't keen to find out which. Again. He scratched a line in the margin. Rule number 1, never trust stillness in people who read minds. He paused, then added. Rule number 2, especially if they are wearing robes worth more than your entire inheritance. Chapter 27, Magical Contraception. New Year started soon enough. Cassian made the tactical decision not to repeat last year's little humiliation tour, and Bath's Hedda, saint that she apparently was, offered to side along apparate him straight to Hogsmeade. Saved him the joy of another round of sitting on the Hogwarts Express looking like someone's older cousin who got lost on the wrong platform. Last year's trip still lingered in his mind. Wedged between 2 excitable second years, surrounded by pumpkin pasties and the faint whiff of someone's ferret familiar. He never recovered emotionally. Nor had his dignity. This time, however, he landed on firm earth just outside the Hogsmeade ward line, cloak still on, hair only mildly tousled by the journey. At least he could still stand. Bath's Hedda dusted off her robe. Didn't drop you. We are making progress. He patted himself down. No internal bleeding. 5 stars. The village was quiet, early. Shops hadn't all opened yet, and the early chill nipped at his nose. Cassian inhaled through it, eyes on the narrow road leading up to the castle. Somewhere behind the mist, Hogwarts loomed. I can't believe I am back already, he muttered, mostly to himself. Didn't we just leave? Bath's Hedda started walking. You got used to not being watched by 15 generations of dead Rosiers. Almost. They let me read in peace, and no one tried to hex my eggs at breakfast. You should write a memoir. My Summer Among the Reasonably Civilized. He followed her. Subtitle, No Portraits Sneered at Me Once. A carriage waited at the foot of the road. Not the full Hogwarts fanfare, just one of the staff transports, modest but practical. The thestrals pulling it gave him a familiar look. One of them sneezed. Nice to be remembered, Cassian muttered, climbing in after her. She raised an eyebrow. Wait, you can see thestrals? Cassian looked at her like she just asked if he believed in unicorns. Terrible comparison, in hindsight, he'd seen unicorns last year. Yet. You can't. She shook her head, scarf bouncing slightly. Your lack of magical knowledge baffles me. How did you even graduate? He groaned. Nepotism and charm. Maybe a deal with a ghost. Jury is still out. She giggled. Thestrals are visible only to those who've seen death. That shut him up. He glanced at the bony creatures tugging the carriage, silent, winged things with hollow eyes and too thin skin stretched over too much bone. Was it someone you knew? She asked. He shrugged, eyes on the trilene as the thestrals clicked their hooves against the hardened path. Not really. I don't know. Might have been my great-grandfather? He died when I was small. Maybe I was there. It is all a bit fogged. Bathsheba didn't push. Just watched the trees roll by, scarf hiding half her face. Reckon they added a fresh turret over summer? Or did the castle just sprout another wing out of spite? Bathsheba's brow arched. He smirked. I wouldn't put it past the place. Probably to house the ghosts that failed their newts. By the time the carriage crunched to a stop at the front gate, the sky had turned the kind of grey that promised rain and delivered dread. He hopped down first, then offered a hand as if he were escorting a duchess rather than a woman who once chucked a textbook at a snow wolf. As they walked up the wide stone steps toward the main doors of the castle, she gave him a side eye. So, Bathsheba started, drawing the word out slowly, Professor McGonagall and Professor Sprout want to speak to us. Cassian side-eyed her back. What about? She gave him a long look. Us. He blinked. Oh. She didn't elaborate, just kept walking. He caught up, lips twitching. That sounds promising. Maybe they want us to do joint lectures. A thrilling hour on the ethical applications of spiral-based rune traps. She didn't even glance at him. Or maybe they want to discuss the fact that two professors vanished into a magical hazard zone and came back flirting like fourth years. Right, he said, mouth dry. Could be that. Bathsheba paused at the top of the landing, hand on the banister, then turned toward the corridor. You think it will be a proper dressing down or just the passive-aggressive kind where they quote school guidelines and pretend we aren't snogging? Cassian considered. Sprout will try to be subtle. McGonagall will hand us a biscuit and then disembowel us verbally. Bathsheba smiled softly. Sounds about right. They veered off toward the staff wing. Cassian rubbed the back of his neck. What is the issue, really? We are two adults who admire each other's naked body. Wait, that is just me. And it is in my mind. Unhear everything I just said. Bathsheba didn't miss a beat. Her palm landed sharp on his arm, no hesitation. This is the problem. He grinned through it, rubbing the spot. That felt like affection. She gave him a look. Not amused. Not exactly horrified either. Somewhere in between. You are lucky I haven't hexed you and don't test me before tea. Cassian glanced down the corridor half expecting someone to pop out from behind a tapestry and take notes. I am fairly certain I saw McGonagall and Dumbledore exchange a look once. The kind that says we've shared a cupboard. Bathsheba stopped mid-step. Her eyes narrowed. I would strongly suggest never to say that again out loud. He held up both hands. Just an observation. A historical one. Then I am revoking your tenure. They pushed through the side door near the staff quarters. So, he said, dropping his voice. If this turns into a stern talk about professionalism and Hogwarts' reputation, do we pretend it is new or just not and promise not to snog near classrooms? Bathsheba shot him a look. I am not kissing you in the history wing. It smells old parchment and crushed egos. I resent that, he muttered. My parchments aren't old. They reached the antechamber outside McGonagall's office. The door was shut, and the brass plaque still looked. It could hex you for breathing too close. Just as he remembered. Cassian gave it a knock, leaning against the wall. The door clicked open a few seconds later, and Professor Sprout stepped out. She wore the same expression one might have after wrangling a sentient shrub. Oh, there you are, she said, brushing her hands off. Minerva is just inside. Bathsheba nodded politely. Cassian gave her the kind of smile you wear when you knew someone is about to scold you but might still offer biscuits. Inside, McGonagall stood by the window, arms crossed. She turned at the sound of the door, and Cassian swore he felt the room drop a few degrees. Professor Rosier. Professor babbling. Morning, he offered. Lovely day. Overcast. Doer. Good for discipline. She ignored him. Please, sit. They did. Chairs that looked fine at a distance but sank the moment you committed. Cassian shuffled a bit until his knees stopped arguing. McGonagall returned to her desk and settled behind it, her lips thinning. Sprout eased into the seat beside her, folding her hands, missing popcorn. I will be brief, McGonagall said. There is talk. Whispers. Cassian leaned forward, hands steepled dramatically. Deputy Headmistress, if someone told you I was secretly teaching the Thestrals Norse grammar, I assure you, it was entirely consensual. Bath's Haida didn't blink. McGonagall didn't move. Sprout, bless her, smiled faintly. We are not here to interrogate. Cassian's eyes flicked wide. Oh. McGonagall looked over the rim of her glasses, that measuring look of hers always delivered. We don't have a rule against staff dating, she said, voice cool as dungeons. Though we do ask it remain as private as possible in front of students. Still, it is best we go over things now, expectations, boundaries, possible outcomes. Cassian opened his mouth. Closed it again. He glanced sideways at Bath's Haida, who was sitting like she hadn't just been told her personal life was now under departmental review. One eyebrow dancing slightly. That was her version of shouting. I see, he said, nodding like a man halfway through a disciplinary hearing for excessive charm. So this is the part where you ask whether we plan to snog behind the bookcases or simply disrupt the entire curriculum with scandal. McGonagall did not smile. I trust you are aware Hogwarts has a reputation to uphold. Of course, Cassian replied. One built on centuries of magical education, Quidditch injuries, and very well-behaved ghosts. Bath's Haida kicked him lightly under the table. Sprout, angel she was, tried to smooth things over. You've both always conducted yourselves professionally. This isn't a rebuke. McGonagall didn't blink. But it is a reminder. Cassian sat up straighter. Well. Consider me reminded. No lip-locking in the middle of first-year lectures. Keep the innuendo out of the curriculum. No romantic rune-pairing activities. McGonagall nodded. That would be best. That said, Hogwarts has long-standing protections in place for unforeseen situations. If you intend to expand your family, a pause to deliver her metaphor, do it elsewhere. Cassian stared. His mouth opened. Then stayed there. Wards can do that. McGonagall didn't answer immediately. Sprout cleared her throat. Cassian leaned forward like he just spotted a forbidden footnote in a manuscript. Sorry, just to clarify, are you saying the castle comes with built-in contraception? The deputy headmistress's expression didn't shift. Yes. Sprout gave a small, reassuring smile, as if this conversation was completely normal. It is not intrusive. Just, protective. Has been for decades. Cassian's eyes narrowed. Of what, exactly? Students? Staff? The furniture? McGonagall's voice didn't waver. All three. The founders were thorough. Bath's Haida crossed her arms, distancing herself from the conversation. She didn't say anything, which was already a win. Cassian rubbed his jaw, still squinting like he hadn't read this in the Hogwarts handbook. So if, hypothetically, a passionate but deeply responsible couple decided to, let's say, engage in extracurricular physical proximity within these hallowed halls. McGonagall cut in. The magic would prevent any lasting consequence. Cassian nodded, slow and thoughtful. Right. Right. Good to know. Very forward-thinking. Salazar must be the architect of this great invention. Sprout cleared her throat. The protections aren't meant to interfere with private relationships. Just to ensure no one gets distracted by complications. Cassian tilted his head. Well. That is very considerate. Nothing says romance like magical sterilization. He gave Bath's Haida a sidelong look. Hogwarts, now officially the world's largest contraceptive field. Charming. Her lips twitched. Barely. McGonagall didn't rise to it. This is not a warning. Simply information we believed prudent to share. Cassian clasped his hands. Much appreciated. I will be sure to inform any interested parties that Hogwarts is, in fact, the safest possible place to make bad decisions. Sprout's mouth trembled. McGonagall stood. You are both excellent educators. That hasn't changed. We trust you will continue to conduct yourselves with discretion. Bath's Haida rose. Of course. Cassian followed, hands tucked behind his back, as he would accidentally do jazz hands otherwise. We will be the picture of propriety. See that you are, McGonagall said, and turned back to her papers. To her none of it had happened. Chapter 28, New Professor. Bath's Haida and Cassian left in silence. Cassian waited until they were 2 corridors down before he spoke. So. Magical contraception wards. Bath's Haida didn't look at him. Yes. Hogwarts is full of surprises. She stopped mid-step. You are not slipping this into your lecture slides. He put a hand to his chest, scandalized. Please. I have standards. I would never bring up contraception during a lecture on goblin rebellions. Unless it is relevant. Which, you know, sometimes it is. She kept walking. He caught up. So what do you reckon happens if someone tries to beat the system? Slip through the cracks. Do the forbidden deed under a particularly rebellious tapestry. Nothing, except a faint buzzing noise, magical interference, and an urgent need for cold showers. That does explain Filch, Cassian muttered. They reached the fork in the hall where the staff quarters split off from the rest of the castle. She paused there, glancing his way. Behave yourself. I always do. She raised a brow. You made a joke about contraceptive architecture like 12 times now. And wasn't it enlightening? She turned away and walked off, shaking her head and most probably muttering sweet nothings. Cassian turned toward his rooms, whistling softly. It was already shaping up to be a very strange year. By the time the train finally dragged itself into Hogsmeade that evening, Cassian was already done with everything worth doing. His classroom was sorted, desks aligned, scrolls arranged by century, samples pinned in a neat row on the backboard. His quarters were clean, too, which meant the house elves were either very proud or deeply concerned. So now, all that remained was the feast. Lovely. The great hall had already been dimmed for the evening, most of the candles hovering lower than usual, throwing shadows across the rafters. At the long staff table, the usual suspects were gathering. Cassian stepped in with his best academic scowl in place, enough to keep conversation at bay until he found a seat. Flitwick waved. Sprout offered a warm nod, eyes crinkling. Hooch glanced up from a battered copy of Quidditch Today and gave a noncommittal nod. Vector was halfway through her drink, talking to Aurora. McGonagall sat in the middle, chair angled slightly, glass of wine untouched. Snape, predictably, didn't look up. Man could probably sense joy from 20 feet and decided it wasn't worth the effort. Cassian took his usual seat next to Bath's Haida, who was already pouring herself tea. She didn't say anything, but her eyebrow arched in a way that said, "Don't start." He offered a little bow and sat anyway. Cassian looked across the staff table at Hagrid, who was deep in conversation with Sylvanus Kettleben, gesturing wide. A nearby jug of pumpkin juice wobbled in protest. The man was practically glowing with enthusiasm, about what, Cassian couldn't hear, but judging by Kettleburn's half-laughing, half-concerned expression, it probably involved something with far too many teeth. He sighed. Gods, old Cassian was such a dick to Hagrid. Not just snide, either. Proper little aristocratic toe rag. Hagrid hadn't deserved half of it, and last year's awkward attempt at civility hadn't done much to patch it over. This year, he would try again. Maybe offer a bottle of mead and not sound like he was reading from a guilt-soaked apology scroll. He got up, smoothing down his robes, and wandered over to where Hagrid and Kettleben were animatedly discussing something involving flying boars or possibly a flying boar-related accident. Kettleben caught sight of him first. Ah, Rosier. You will love this. Hagrid here was just telling me about the time he had to tranquilize a catoblepas with nothing but a shovel and a promise. Hagrid chuckled, rumbling warmly in his chest. Weren't quite a shovel. More of a spade, really. Cassian stopped beside them and offered a chuckle. Sounds like an excellent use of ministry-approved handling techniques. Hagrid blinked at him, unsure if that was a dig. Cassian met his eyes. Glad the boar didn't win. The silence lasted half a beat too long, but Hagrid's shoulders relaxed a little. Well, ya know how it is. Can't let 'em think they won. Cassian smiled. That is my entire philosophy, actually. Ketlaban barked a laugh, thumped Hagrid on the back with his good hand, and returned to some elaborate gesturing involving tusks and accidental levitation. Cassian stood near, pretending he wasn't checking whether Hagrid looked like he wanted to throw him out a window. So far, no signs of imminent ejection. Good start. By the way, he said, casually tipping his head toward the far end of the table, we got a new face. Bath's Haida glanced over. Defense against the dark arts. He is the new one. Bloody, Cassian muttered, squinting across the table. Didn't realize there would be new applicants after what happened last year. Ketlaban, who had just buttered half his beard by mistake, let out a sigh through his nose. You were the one who saved Mulford, right? Cassian gave a mild shrug. I was in the right place. Which was, frankly, an understatement. The last defense against the dark arts professor, Professor Mulford, nearly died when one of the older tomes woke up and decided to curse her spine inside out. Cassian found her in the library, slumped over a text on counter curses, barely breathing. Still, no need to brag. She survived, but only just. Rumor had it she retired straight to a coastal cottage with no magic, no wands, and a cat named Brian. Curse doesn't like getting ignored, Ketlaban muttered. That post's been hexed to the brim since before I had both legs. Cassian nodded absently, eyes flicking to the newcomer. The new professor was already seated. Tall, lean-built, skin a deep brown, hair short and curled close to the scalp. His robes weren't fresh off the rack Hogwarts standard either, woven with subtle protection runes and dragonhide along the cuffs. He looked like the sort who brought his own wand holster and knew how to use it. He is Marius Vale. Ketlaban added. Used to be with the Department of Magical Defense, worked under Roberts for a stretch. Bit of a specialist, counter curses, wardcraft and dark artifact containment. Rumor is he turned down a seat on the Hit Wizard Task Force. Hagrid laughed loudly, shaking his head fondly. I remember him from my days. Always kind, that one. Even let a Kelpie chew his robes once without hex in it. Cassian sipped the tea Bath's Haida had just handed. That is either a ringing endorsement or an excellent reason not to lend him clothes. He settled back into his chair when Hagrid got up to get new students. Not long after the doors swung open and McGonagall strode in with a trail of soaked first years at her heels. They dripped all over the flagstones, a herd of miniature ghosts in oversized robes, eyes wide and necks craning as they tried to take it all in. Hooch let out a sigh. And so it begins. Cassian watched them file past the staff table, a few already elbowing each other. Someone sneezed dramatically. Another whispered something about the ceiling. The Sorting Hat waited on its stool, limp and vaguely annoyed, like a pensioner forced to entertain visitors. McGonagall cleared her throat, unrolled a scroll, and began calling names. Belle, Katie. A small girl with straw-colored hair stepped forward. The hat barely touched her head before it barked, Gryffindor. And she dashed off to thunderous applause. Next came Belby, Marcus. Cassian tilted his head. Bet he is a crier. Bath's Haida muttered, Tensicles says he gets Ravenclaw. Belby sat down, the hat frowned, and after a long pause, said, Ravenclaw. Called it, she said, not even smug. Cassian set the cup down, fingers drumming, you and Trelawney should start a book. Dunbar, Faye, came next. Another Gryffindor. Then Carmichael, Eddie, who looked like he read 3 textbooks on sorting and still wasn't sure it was real. Hat took its sweet time with him. Eventually, Ravenclaw. McLaggen, Cormac swaggered up like he already had a Quidditch broom waiting. The hat tried to say something before he cut in, yes, actually cut in, saying, definitely Gryffindor. That is where my uncle was. The hat muttered something indistinct before agreeing. Gryffindor. The names went on, Carl Hopkins, another Gryffindor. Marietta Edgecombe, quiet and wide-eyed, went to Ravenclaw. Cho Chang followed her and joined the same table. Students clapped, housemates yelled, ghosts hovered. Cassian caught a glimpse of Peeves floating upside down above the Hufflepuff table, whispering something into a first year's ear that made her pale instantly. Cassian nudged Bath's Haida with his elbow. So. New defense professor with curse division flair. You think the old man brought him in to lift the curse? She didn't look up from her tea. Doubt it. If he did, he is about 2 decades too late. Still, Cassian murmured, he looks like the sort who patches wounds with one hand and digs graves with the other. Bath's Haida gave him a long, flat stare. You are being weird. I am just saying, if someone like that shows up midsummer, either Dumbledore wants something sorted or he is keeping his options open. Could be here to do the real job while the rest of us argue over quills and class schedules. The sorting dragged on. Names came and went, some quicker than others. The hat got snippy about halfway through and demanded quiet when the Ravenclaw table burst into cheers mid-announcement. When it finally ended, Dumbledore rose, gave the room a mild smile, and kicked off the feast with his usual speech, and the tables filled themselves with food like magic was a well-trained servant. Cassian also learned of another new professor, Arifskander, who, as Dumbledore announced, would be taking over Muggle studies this year while Quirrell was away on sabbatical. Chapter 29, Curse Logs Number 1, Marius Vale, read after ch 28. Marius Vale turned the envelope over twice. It was thick cream parchment. The wax was indigo, stamped with a phoenix that looked like it might rise right off the flap if he stared too long. No mistaking the handwriting. No mistaking the sender. Albus Dumbledore had written to him personally. Vale sat heavily at the little desk in his rented flat, boots kicked off near the hearth, coat half slipped from his shoulders. The room smelled faintly of fire whiskey and spell oil. He'd been back from a short contract with the DMLE only a week, and he'd half hoped for a stretch of quiet before the next bloody summons. Apparently not. He broke the wax. The parchment unfolded with a creak. He read with a heavy sigh. My dear Marius. It has been many years since I last had the pleasure of seeing your handwriting across an essay, or your wand raised in the old dueling chamber. I hope this letter finds you in good health, and that the years since you left these halls have been neither unkind nor uneventful. More than one colleague has brought me word of your career, your diligence in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, your steady hand in field work where others faltered, your unflagging interest in the finer intricacies of counter-hexes. None of this surprised me. Even as a student you had an eye for the mechanisms of a curse, and a patience that outlasted frustration. I am glad to know that those qualities have served you well. I imagine you have had triumphs, and perhaps some wounds, in your years since Hogwarts. Such is the fate of those who take seriously the defense of others. I trust that you have allowed yourself moments of rest between assignments, though I know too well how men of your dedication are apt to neglect their own ease. I should like to hear of your travels, and of the roads that brought you from those first classroom wards to the wide field of duty. You would do me a kindness in writing back, not merely to accept or refuse the offer that follows, but to tell an old teacher how his student has fared beyond the castle stones. Now to the matter at hand. We have need of a teacher whose understanding of counter-curses exceeds fashion, and whose patience outlasts even these ancient walls. I would ask you to accept the post of Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor for the coming year. Officially, you will instruct our students in the principles and practice of defensive magic. Unofficially, I would also entrust you with a second task, to observe a certain anomaly surrounding the post itself. It has troubled us for years, and though you are not asked to resolve it, I would value your eyes upon it. You are not to attempt any unbinding alone. Logs must be kept, student safety held paramount. I do not demand a victory. I request clarity. Should you accept, you would be both professor and witness, and in that witness perhaps lies the chance to name what others have only whispered. With warm regards, and fond remembrance of the boy who once argued footnotes with me past midnight. P.S. Deference to Madame Pants in all matters of documentary access is non-negotiable. Albus P.W.B. Dumbledore. Vale sighed again slowly, tapping the parchment against his knee. Defense Against the Dark Arts. The Cursed Post. Everyone knew the stories, professors lasting barely a year, some leaving mad, some not leaving at all. The curse was whispered in Auror barracks, muttered over late pints, but never officially acknowledged. And now the headmaster wanted him to walk into it. He leaned back, chair groaning. He set the letter on the desk and reached for the half-empty glass. The whiskey burned down his throat. Defense Professor, he muttered. Bloody marvelous. Patience outlasting castle stones. Observe a long-standing anomaly. Do not act alone. Vale rubbed at his temple, then pulled quill and parchment closer. If he was going to accept, and he suspected he already had the moment he cracked that wax, then he would do it on his own terms. He dipped the quill, ink catching in the lamplight. Dear Headmaster. I'll keep logs, defer to Pants, Merlin help us, and keep the children alive, which is more than I can say for most field assignments. You asked not for victory, but for clarity. Clarity I can try to give. But if you've set me against something that's been chewing through even you for decades, you'd better be ready for the mess that follows. M. Vale. He sanded the page, folded it, and sealed it with a drop of red wax. The owl was already tapping at the sill, clever eyes gleaming. Vale tied the letter to its leg and watched it vanish into the night. Marius Vale landed just outside Hogsmeade Station with a thump that rattled his teeth. He never did apparition gracefully. His landing technique had been described once by an unimpressed aura as a man falling sideways out of a wardrobe. True to form, he stumbled, muttered a curse, then righted himself, dusting his coat. He set off toward the castle with his battered trunk levitating behind him. The trunk rattled occasionally, not from dangerous artifacts but from a stash of licorice wands he'd bought on impulse in Diagon Alley. Vale had a habit of chewing them when thinking, which made him look like a surly schoolboy rather than an accomplished curse-breaker. He paused as he reached the gates and muttered, "Well, here's hoping the walls don't spit me out by Christmas." Marius saw Flitwick and McGonagall already inside as he stepped into the office, and despite the years he couldn't help slouching like a boy caught sneaking out of bed. "Hi," he said, a bit too casual. Then coughed, straightened. Good evening." Dumbledore waved him forward, eyes bright as he poured tea. Vale sat down, trying not to feel 12 again. "Professor Vale," Dumbledore said warmly. "Welcome back to Hogwarts." "Still feels strange hearing that," Vale muttered. He glanced at the shelves, the whirring instruments, the phoenix preening in the corner. "And still smells the same. Tea leaves and chaos." Dumbledore's smile deepened. "Some things do not change. Now, expectations. Your first duty is teaching. Defense first, everything else second. Any irregularities with the post are to be logged, not engaged. If you wish to attempt a ritual, it must be reviewed by Professor Flitwick. Any matter involving the school's structure requires Professor McGonagall's approval." Vale nodded, half smiling. "So I'm not allowed to blow up a corridor without permission. Good to know." Flitwick let out a laugh, voice piping. "A sensible policy. It's amazing how many young professors forget to ask before rearranging the floor plan." Vale chuckled. "Don't worry, Professor. I'm far too lazy to move furniture by accident." McGonagall's lips twitched, almost a laugh. Dumbledore lifted his cup. "Confidence and caution both, Mr. Vale. Hold to those, and you may last longer than most." Vale clinked his cup back, licorice stick still wedged in his teeth. "I'll settle for making it to spring term without setting off the ceiling." Dumbledore set his cup down with a soft clink. "One more thing, Professor Vale. Let us keep this matter between ourselves and the few gathered here. The history of magic Professor Rosier has a particular curiosity for what does not belong to him. He is sharp, too sharp for his own good, and prone to looking where he shouldn't. With your expertise outranking his in these matters, I do not doubt you could evade him. Or better yet, I would prefer you not to interact overmuch. It would be simpler." Flitwick gave a cheerful chuckle. "Sharp, yes, and magnetes to trouble. He asks more questions than even I can answer, and that is saying something." McGonagall let out a long sigh. "If curiosity were a disciplinary offence, we'd be taking statements twice a week." Vale arched a brow but kept quiet, chewing the end of his licorice wand thoughtfully. If they were warning him this pointedly on his first night back, the man must be a complication worth noting. He would keep an eye for that one. Chapter 30, Suhu. Warning, this chapter may contain snogging. Proceed with caution, or excitement. Cassian didn't dive in with the rest. He started slow. "Bit of veg first, steamed and healthy, fiber, thank you very much." Followed by a decent portion of protein, roast lamb, a slice of chicken breast, and something suspiciously like lentils hiding in the corner of a bowl. Healthy fat next. Bit of olive oil from the salad, few walnuts scattered into his plate like contraband. Then a small serving of barley pilaf. Finally, finished with a scoop of sauerkraut. Prebiotics. Gut health, apparently. Hogwarts kitchens, bless them, catered to every possible taste, including historically accurate dietary quirks. Bath's Haida gave him a look like he just performed surgery on his plate. "Are you portioning that by color or size? I am trying not to die of nutritional incompetence." "You work at a castle where the pudding refills itself. And I plan to live long enough to judge that fact for several decades. She huffed and passed the potatoes. He learned this diet thing in 2025, back when everyone on Earth had a spreadsheet for their macros and Jim Brothers carried peanut butter like it was a birthright. Cassian had never quite reached the eat 6 eggs a day and talk about nothing but creatine stage, but he was close. Just close enough to get twitchy when a meal had no fiber. He was even considering, at one point, during a rare burst of delusional optimism, min-maxing his intake. Maybe get some muscle back. If he could convince his lazy arse to lift something heavier than a textbook. Didn't happen, obviously. But the dietary knowledge stuck. So now, in a castle full of gravy boats and bottomless pudding, Cassian portioned like a man dodging death by insulin spike. Hogwarts didn't stock kombucha, but sauerkraut did the job. Gut health mattered, even in a world where ghosts gave directions and staircases moved like drunk cattle. He was even considering doing his own yogurt. Not the sugary sort with a cartoon on the lid, no thank you, proper yogurt. Greek, Turkish, Bulgarian, whatever region claimed it first, Cassian didn't want to offend anyone's ancestral dairy. He just wanted it thick, tangy, and not stuffed with the magical equivalent of corn syrup. Hogwarts had a pantry, didn't it? A cauldron? He could probably rig a fermentation charm without setting off the castle wards. Probably. That reminded him of the time he stole eggs from the poultry. Wasn't the pantry right next to it? He scraped the last bite of roast, watching a third year from Hufflepuff try to sneak 2 treacle tarts into his robe pocket. Bold. He respected that. By the time the meal wrapped up, and Dumbledore gave his usual "don't go into the forest unless you want to be eaten" speech, Cassian had already started counting how long it would take the first years to forget that entirely. Maybe 3 days. 4 if they were cowards. When students rolled out with prefects leading them, Cassian stood and stretched, joints clicking in place, then caught Bathsheda's eye across the table. "Shall I walk you to your chambers, Professor?" he asked, full mock chivalry. "Promise not to faint dramatically en route." "You are lucky I haven't tripped you in front of the students," she said, but rose anyway. They walked together, past the trick stair and the tapestry where Peeves had once hidden a live toad in someone's tea. She keyed open her door with a flick of her wand. He followed her inside without asking. It wasn't the first time. The wards let him through without a twitch, which meant he was still keyed in. Bathsheba dropped her bag onto the small desk by the window and pulled off her coat. Cassian stayed standing, watching the flames dance for a second before he peeled off his outer robe and flung it over the arm of the couch. He sat on the couch, elbow on the armrest, hand half curled at his mouth like he was thinking too hard. She perched on the arm opposite, one leg drawn up, hair slipping loose from the twist she always wore. He glanced at her. She didn't look away. He tapped his fingers against the armrest. So, she echoed. Well. They hadn't done it yet. That. The deed. They graduated from mouth-adjacent kisses to proper ones sometime before they left Norway. Still new, still odd in the quiet moments. It hadn't gone further, not because they swore off it, just, hadn't crossed the line yet. Which, for 2 supposedly mature adults, was either restraint or extreme cowardice. Jury was out. Now here they were. Her perched on the armrest, one leg tucked up like it belonged there. Him lounged across the sofa like a bloke who absolutely thought about shagging his colleague and then taken notes on why he hadn't. Cozy. Civil. Definitely not staring. Cassian scratched his jaw. So, she echoed again. He gestured vaguely at the space between them. We going to acknowledge the part where this is becoming a thing? Or just keep pretending it is all very scholarly and coincidental? She didn't flinch. Depends. Are you planning to start a bibliography? Already drafted it in my head. Chapter 1, How Not to Panic When Your Research Partner Kisses You in a Magical Tent. Bathsheda's mouth twitched, but she didn't look away. And Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is still being peer-reviewed. Lots of footnotes. Some debate about sources. She leaned forward, resting her elbow on her knee. It is not complicated, Cassian. That is what people say right before it gets very complicated. Then don't overthink it. Oh, I don't overthink. He paused. I marinate. Her hand darted out and slapped his shin. He grinned. See? Physical contact. That is progress. She rolled her eyes, but didn't move away. Her hand stayed on his leg, fingers tapping, then stopping. His throat went dry. "I don't regret Norway," she said, "quiet now." Cassian leaned back against the cushion. "No," he said. "Neither do I." She shifted slightly, the edge of her knee brushing against his thigh. "It wasn't an accident." He didn't pretend it was. "Are we doing this?" he asked, voice husky. She looked at him. "Yes." Then she kissed him. Straightforward, no hesitation. This one landed right. No cheek, no corner. Proper contact. He matched it, one hand finding her waist without any flair. It wasn't rushed, wasn't theatrical. Just, good. Her fingers curled in his robe. His hand found her face, not pouncing, just following the natural line of where this had been going since somewhere between collapsing caves and frostbitten cliffs. She pulled back slightly, breath warm against his skin. "Still overthinking?" Cassian's eyes flicked up to meet hers. "I am thinking just to savor it, thanks." She didn't move far. Her thumb brushed the corner of his mouth, then lingered there. He could smell her, tea, ink, that strange rune dust scent that had clung to both of them since Trondheim. He dropped his voice. "Should I draft a consent form, or are we trusting each other not to hex anything midway?" She didn't laugh. "Stop talking." So he did. Her weight shifted again, and the sofa dipped. His hand slid further up her side, "Just learning." She kissed him again, firmer this time, less exploratory. More assured. Cassian had the fleeting, ridiculous thought that he should catalogue this. Not in words, but in sensation, how her breath hitched right before she deepened the kiss, the press of her hand against his ribs, the smell of cold air still clinging to her clothes. He would remember all of it. His fingers brushed the back of her neck, caught a curl that had escaped the twist. She pushed him gently, just a reminder that she wasn't above taking control if needed. "Your boots are still on," she muttered. Cassian glanced down. "So are yours." She raised an eyebrow. "Fix it." "Yes, ma'am." He kicked his off one by one, the thuds soft against the carpet. She followed suit, a little less graceful, one boot catching the edge of the coffee table and sending a book skittering off. Neither of them bothered picking it up. He caught her again when she leaned back in, this time guiding her gently into his lap. Not a power play. Just comfort. Familiarity growing roots. They kissed until the fire dimmed. Somewhere between kiss 12 and 15, give or take, her hand slipped beneath the hem of his shirt, fingers skating the edge of his skin. He startled slightly, not from the touch but the simplicity of it, how easily they slid from dry sarcasm into this. Cassian leaned his forehead against hers. "You are aware this is an extremely questionable use of school resources." Bath's Hada hummed. "We are not on school grounds. Private rooms don't count. Let's hope the wards agree." "They will." "Good. I would hate for Hogwarts to cock-block me with magical contraceptive fog." She smacked his chest again. "You are ruining it. I am documenting." They didn't rush. They didn't undress. It wasn't about that yet. Just warmth. Skin. Contact. An agreement made without dramatic declarations. Later, much later, she curled against him on the sofa, his arm slung around her back, her fingers tangled in his. The fire had gone to embers, but neither of them made a move to fix it. He leaned in, nose brushing the back of her neck. Warm skin, faint smell of fire and tea. "Full disclosure," he said, tone easy, "my father told me you are a tool." She didn't twitch. Just tipped her head, eyes still on the fire. "And what do you think?" Cassian hummed low in his throat, mouth so close that his words stirred the loose strands of her hair. Trying to figure out the best way to break it to him. Something theatrical. Enough shock to get a mild heart attack, but not full cardiac failure. "Don't want to cut the party short." She glanced sideways, one brow raised. "That is oddly specific." "Needs planning," he said, arm slipping round her waist. "Timing. I was thinking, walk into the study with you hanging off my arm, announce the engagement, and maybe have you call him Dad by accident. That should do it." "Overkill," she murmured. "Don't worry," he said, "you will be holding my wand the whole time." Figuratively. She snorted and dropped her forehead to his shoulder. The laugh shook them both. Cassian rested his chin lightly on her head. The room was quiet now, only the soft crack of the fire filling in the blanks. She pulled back a little to look at him properly. What did he really say? He rolled his eyes. Something poetic. That you are not one of us. That you are, useful. Her lip curled, faint and sharp. Ah! Classic pure-blood charm. He said. Followed by a suggestion to course correct, which I believe is code for ditch the brilliant mudblood sympathizer before she makes you start liking books not bound in dragon hide. I do like being useful, she said. He looked down at her. You also like hexing people who treat you like you are disposable. Only when they deserve it. Cassian's smile faded slowly. I didn't say anything clever, by the way, he said. Just left. Told him I respected you. Which, apparently, is worse than sleeping with a werewolf these days. He scratched his jaw. So if you've been picturing your boyfriend as this dashing, courageous sort, prepare for crushing disappointment. I tucked my tail and bolted. Bathsheba didn't respond straight off. She just adjusted the hem of her sleeve and leaned further into the crook of his arm, her thumb brushing lazy circles on his wrist. It just stretched long enough for him to start wondering if she fell asleep mid-pity. She hadn't. You didn't hex anything? She asked finally. I briefly considered setting the curtains on fire, he said. But they were velvet and I am not a savage. She gave a soft laugh. Missed opportunity. Chapter 31, Founders. Cassian woke up with someone's hair in his mouth and a cramp in his lower back that made him regret all life choices, including the one that involved falling asleep in his colleague's arms on a couch not designed for overnight use. Bathsheba shifted sometime after midnight and wedged herself against his ribs like a very dignified heat pack. Her leg was across his. Her hair, somewhere near his collarbone. He peeled a strand off his tongue and sighed through his nose. The fire had gone out. The room was dim, blue-gray light seeping in through the curtain edge, the kind that only meant one thing. Morning. Not the gentle, let's stretch and have a lazy breakfast kind. No. This was the Hogwarts special. The kind that brought early rising students, curious ghosts, and at least one unhelpfully talkative portrait with opinions no one asked for. Cassian shifted, careful not to jostle her. His shoulder cracked like an old hinge. His leg was asleep. Dignity was nowhere to be found. Right. Option A, embrace the walk of shame and hope the students respected discretion. Option B, sneak out before breakfast, avoid eye contact with everyone, and pretend nothing untoward happened. Option B it was. He slid his arm out from under her head. She stirred, fingers curling slightly, but didn't wake. Her breathing stayed even. He paused to take a look. Her face soft in sleep, hair rumpled, one cheek squished into the cushion. She looked safe. A person who could gut a rune trap and hex a bureaucrat in the same breath, and still fall asleep on him without a second thought. He bent down, pressed a kiss to her temple, and muttered, "You snore like a dignified eagle." Then he was up, cloak slung over his shoulder, boots in hand. He didn't bother with the wand light. He knew the layout. Knew which floorboards creaked and which tapestry concealed a shortcut back to his side of the staff wing. He'd done dumber things at worse hours. Old Cassian was not good at anything except stupid decisions. The corridor outside was empty, blessedly. No curious second years out for an early vomit after the train feast. He padded barefoot along the stones, a thief fleeing an extremely consensual crime. By the time he reached his own door, the first hints of breakfast smells were beginning to creep up from the kitchens. Toast. Sausage. Maybe eggs if the elves were feeling generous. He shut the door behind him and dropped the boots with a soft thud. Right, he muttered. Operation, not seen cuddling colleague, mostly successful. He flung off the jumper and scrubbed a hand through his hair. The mirror on his desk gave an imaginative small huff. You look like someone hexed your dreams. The mirror spoke, in his imagination. I am fine, he said, brushing lint off his sleeve. Just, busy night. The mirror raised a skeptical eyebrow. With Professor babbling. He threw a sock over it and ignored the muffled cackle that followed. Showered, cleaned up, robed, and slightly less a man who slept on a sofa, Cassian headed to the Great Hall. The place wasn't full yet, just a scatter of early risers. A few Ravenclaws hunched over toast and books, some Hufflepuffs passing around a jar of honey, got it, and one Gryffindor already trying to trade bacon for flapjacks as if it was a black market deal. Cassian slid into his seat at the staff table. "Morning," Cassian said, reaching for the boiled eggs. "Sleep well." Bathsheda's voice slid in beside him. He turned, mildly startled. She looked infuriatingly composed. Fresh robes. Hair pinned. Mug of tea in hand like she hadn't just snoring when he left. He blinked. "Did you teleport here?" She sipped. "I got up when you left. 10 minutes later I decided I wasn't going to let you get all the toast." He stared. "You were awake?" "For most of it, yes. And you didn't say anything. You were so smug of yourself, creeping out like a cat burglar. I didn't have the heart to ruin it." He made a face. "You are the worst." She smiled into her cup. Classes kicked in straight away. No easing in, no gentle reminder that Hogwarts was, in fact, a school and not an extended magical retreat. First up for Cassian was first-year Slytherins and Hufflepuffs. A group with the social dynamics of a duel between a Puffskein and a Basilisk, and about as much shared enthusiasm for history of magic as a group of cats faced with a bath. He walked in just before the bell and found a couple of dozens tiny faces blinking up at him like he wandered into the wrong room. One boy in green had already started yawning before the chalk hit the board. "Right," Cassian said, clapping to draw attention. One girl dropped her quill. "Let's get the important bit out of the way. I am not Professor Binns. You are not asleep. You are not dreaming. If you are, and I feature in it holding parchment like some dashing historian, you should probably stay in bed and thank your subconscious." Silence. Good. He flicked his wand. The classroom lights shifted. Warm, steady glow replaced the cold grey of early morning. He walked to the front desk and leaned against it. "Now," he said, folding his arms. "Some of you." His eyes landed on the kid still yawning, "might have been told this class is the easiest way to nap through your O.W.ls." Cassian's grin sharpened. "Well, bad news. That was before. I am new. Not a ghost. Not planning to die on the job. No promises, but I would like to see at least one of you remember who founded your house by the end of the term without looking it up." He flicked his wand again. The blackboard behind him changed. Lines curved and shifted into the Hogwarts crest. Below it, 4 names: Godric, Helga, Rowena, Salazar. "Today," he said, tapping each name, "we start with something simple. The founders. You probably heard the basics. Gryffindor was brave, Hufflepuff was kind, Ravenclaw was clever, and Slytherin was misunderstood." A few Hufflepuffs giggled. The Slytherins didn't. Cassian gave them a cheerful nod. "Relax. I am not going to insult my house. That is your prefect's job." "What you haven't heard," Cassian continued, pacing in front of the desk now, "is what they disagreed on. Because Hogwarts wasn't founded by 4 best mates frolicking through the Highlands. It was built by people with opinions. Strong ones. And, shocker, when people with strong opinions build something together, they argue." He turned to the board. 4 lines extended from the names, each forming a little branch. "Who can tell me what Salazar Slytherin wanted that the others didn't?" A hand went up. "Not a Hufflepuff." "Interesting. Mr. Elliot, sir. He wanted only purebloods allowed at Hogwarts." "Correct. Well done, Elliot. Have 10 points for paying attention to your own house history." Cassian chuckled. "And what did the others say to that?" More hands now. A girl near the front, yellow and black scarf askew, raised hers with hesitant confidence. "Emily," she said quickly, "they disagreed. Said all magical children should be taught." "Exactly. 10 points for that. Bit awkward at parties after that, I would imagine." He waved the wand again. The names faded, and were replaced by 4 parchment fragments, each showing different bits of the original Hogwarts Charter, copied directly from the preserved originals. Or, well, conjured facsimiles. Hogwarts wouldn't even let him touch the real ones. He let the room sit in silence a moment longer. Watched their eyes flit between the ancient script and each other. "This," he said, tapping one parchment with his wand, "is Rowena Ravenclaw's handwriting. See the sharp curves? Elegant, and vicious in her corrections. She rewrote 3 whole paragraphs of Salazar's proposal. and underlined the word elitism 6 times. A few eyes widened. One boy raised a tentative hand. Is that real? Cassian grinned. As real as Hogwarts plumbing. Which is older than it should be and full of secrets. Rowena's? That part is iffy. You see, she was clever enough to hold 16 ideas in her head at once, none of which ever got along. So her handwriting, bit of a war crime, really. Looked like a banshee with a quill in its teeth. A few students laughed. One snorted so hard his inkpot tipped. Cassian didn't pause. That's how smart people write, by the way. Too much going on up here. He tapped his temple and too little patience to make it legible. He paced slowly, eyes sweeping over the classroom. So is this Rowena's letter? Maybe. It got her magical signature, sure. But the letters are suspiciously tidy, nothing like her usual murder by quill scrawl. A few students leaned in. Cassian tapped the page with his wand. Could be a self-writing quill. They've been around longer than any of you. Ancient Egypt had one in their ministry that copied official decrees, and drew root stick figures on the margins when bored. He grinned, turning toward the blackboard again. History is messy. Full of handwriting that doesn't match, spells that misfire, and records written by people with agendas. Your job isn't to believe everything. It is to question the parchment until it either confesses or bursts into flames. No one was giggling now. A few heads were down, quills scratching. One of the Hufflepuffs was frowning like he just discovered he'd been lied to his whole childhood. Cassian had a strange urge to pat him on the head. Next bit, he said, pulling up the second fragment. Salazar's alleged note to Godric, regarding magical dueling policies. It ends with yours in Brotherhood and Wand, which sounds slightly too bromantic for two men arguing over blood purity. He looked at frowning little faces. Ah, how he missed enlightening underdeveloped minds. Nothing like the suspicious squint of 11-year-olds faced with their first intellectual betrayal. He waved his wand, and the room dipped into dimness, shadows stretching long across the stone floor. One more flick, Lumos Spectaculum, and the light started to change. Shapes bloomed in the dark. First, faint lines, then color, movement. 4 figures shimmered into view in the center of the classroom like ghosts caught mid-breath. 2 men at the front of a slim boat. One broad, dark crimson-haired, like waterfall of flames, sword strapped to his back like he forgotten he wasn't in a battlefield. The other, thinner, sharper, robes crisp even in mist, wand clenched like it was part of his hand. Behind them, 2 women. One perched cross-legged at the bow, hair coiled like vines, eyes darting across the water, scanning everything. The other leaned back against the hull with the casual grace of someone used to being underestimated. Her smile was small, but it stuck. Chapter 32, Academic Liabilities. The founders were crossing a lake. Not just any lake. Wide, still, silver dark in the illusion's low light, looked suspiciously like the Great Lake, minus the squid. Mist clung to the surface, curling around the boat, hiding everything past the edge of the spell's radius. The only sound in the real room was a faint gasp from wide-eyed children. As the boat pushed forward, the mist started to pull back. Bit by bit, the jagged silhouette of land rose ahead. Not a gentle slope, not a welcoming shore, just rock, rising sharp from the land like it hadn't been expecting visitors. Perched high on the ridge, lit only by illusion moonlight. All 4 in the boat sat up straighter. Cassian stopped the spell. The figures froze, boat caught mid-glide. Light fell in from the frozen illusion, cutting across the classroom and casting a long, blue-tinged glow that caught him square in the chest as he stepped between the desks. Did you know, he said, that first years ride boats to the castle because the founders wanted new students to feel exactly what they felt at that moment? He paused, let it sit. Of course, students these days see the castle fully built. Lit up like a prize hog. Bit more dramatic than a misty rock. Still, the idea stuck. He paced a little, before pointing at the illusion. No big feast. No sorting hat yet. Just 4 people in a boat, finding the one place they might agree on something. He turned back to the illusion just as the castle started rising out of the stone. It wasn't grand all at once. Not even close. It built itself the same way any decent thing did, slow, a bit stubborn, and with far too many arguments about what shape the windows should be. He turned back to the class. Of course, all that is just my interpretation of how Hogwarts was built. Artistic liberty, smoke and mirrors, and a sprinkle of informed guesswork. He stepped back into the center of the room, wand tucked under his arm. Truth is, we know very little about the actual process. No blueprints. No minutes from the planning committee. Founders didn't exactly leave behind a building manual. Some of the students were still staring at the illusion, the four figures locked in soft, silver light, standing proudly before the castle they built. Hogwarts has secrets. Big ones. Layers under layers. Passages that don't lead anywhere until they do. Doors that vanish when you are in a hurry. Rooms that remember things you would rather forget. And here is the strange bit, he said. Even the founders didn't know all of them. Each of them built parts of the castle, enchanted them, hid things, added wards, but the castle kept changing after they were gone. As if it is still building itself. Or remembering something. He stopped in front of a pair of wide-eyed first years. There is a theory, he went on, that each founder left behind a secret chamber. Not a broom cupboard or a reading nook. Proper hidden spaces. Sealed with their magic. Designed to open only under very specific circumstances. A couple of students were clearly hanging on to every word now. Even the yawner had stopped doodling and was watching him like he might start breathing fire. Cassian grinned. Some of you might have heard the rumors about the Chamber of Secrets. Terribly dramatic name. Bit of a branding problem, that one. A few heads nodded, some cautiously, some like they were waiting for him to confirm every bedtime horror story they'd ever been told. He kept going. The story goes, Salazar Slytherin built it himself. Stashed a monster in it. Locked the place tight, so only his true heir could open it. Not sure what qualifies as a true heir, blood, ideology, family crest, who knows. Magic is not always literal, unfortunately. Did anyone ever find it? Elliot again, leaning forward now. He considered if he should say it or not, then shrugged and went with honesty. 50 years ago, there were rumors about it, Cassian said, eyes flicking to the illusion still floating in the center of the classroom. But I don't buy it. That got him a few surprised looks. Raised his hands before they could ask more about it. What I want you to learn most in history classes, he continued, stepping between the desks again, is not the history. It is how it is told. That the narrator, me, your book, whatever authority decides the syllabus, can bend the truth. Dress it up. Cut bits out. And suddenly that lie is your new truth. Some of them looked unsure. A boy scratched something next to his notes, underlining it 3 times. Always, Cassian said, clapping his hands, do your own research. Ask questions. Challenge the bloody footnotes. Second guess what you read, especially if it is too neat. The sound snapped a few of them out of their fog. Quills moved faster now. From second class on, he added, I will start weaving magic into these lessons. Spells you already know, so no need to panic. This isn't charms. I am not your magic teacher. A few chuckles there. Someone whispered something about Binns never using a wand at all, which, fair point. Cassian walked to his desk, waving his wand. The illusion faded, the classroom light coming back in full. Magic exists in your history. And history exists in your magic. You learn them separately, which is a bit like trying to learn flying with one wing. He then waved them off. I want an essay on founders in Hogwarts. Do your research, add your insights. There won't be grading, but it will teach you how to form your own opinions, and that is the most important thing I can teach you. A few groans, a few resigned nods, and one particularly brave Hufflepuff who muttered something about already an essay first class. Cassian raised an eyebrow at him. Ah yes, he said, pointing a finger like he just spotted a rare species, welcome to education. Tell your grandchildren you survived it. He watched the last of them shuffle out. Elliot gave him a quick, awkward thank you, sir, before dashing off. 1 class down. 11 more to go. He stood up, stretching as his spine popped in protest, and made his way out into the corridor. Mid-morning traffic had started, students darting between staircases, portraits whispering. Cassian passed Professor Sinistra halfway to the staff room. She gave him a look over her tea and said, you look like you taught first years. I have. Don't recommend it. Might sue. On what grounds? Endangerment. Possibly slander. She chuckled and kept walking. Staff room was empty, mercifully. He threw himself into one of the threadbare armchairs and kicked his feet up onto a trunk that looked like it hadn't opened since Castle was built. Bathsheda didn't show. She had back-to-back classes and a timetable that looked like a cry for help. Rune theory, ancient script reconstruction, and whatever else she decided to cram into the same day. He had Gryffindor and Ravenclaw first years that afternoon. Separate classes, but the same bloody content. Why they weren't combined was anyone's guess. Probably some forgotten tradition involving inter-house seating drama or an old headmaster's ghost refusing to condone cohabitation of timetables. Other professors had to adjust their lessons to different levels of magical proficiency, one wand flicked too far and someone lost an eyebrow, but history. Well, his subject involved no spells beyond his own. He just had to talk. Spin a decent enough story. Keep them from stabbing themselves with quills. Didn't matter. He got paid by the class, not by the head count. He would teach the same material twice, maybe rearrange the metaphors, toss in a new sarcastic aside. Bit of variety never hurt. He made it through both sessions without injury. Gryffindors were louder, but they asked more questions. Ravenclaws were quieter, but at least 3 of them corrected the parchment dates before he finished his sentence. By the end of the day, he'd gone through the Founder's boat ride twice, tweaked a few jokes for the Ravenclaws, they were quicker on the uptake, and managed to only get one question about whether Slytherin's monster was actually a dragon in disguise. It wasn't. Probably. The next morning, second years. Gryffindors and Hufflepuffs. One glance at the roll and his eyebrows went up. Well. This would be chaos. Fred and George Weasley. And Cedric Diggory. He missed those troublemakers. Well, troublemakers might be generous. Cedric wasn't so much trouble as, tragically upright. The kind of kid who probably polished his wand in the mirror before bed. Not that Cassian had anything against neat handwriting and decency, but Cedric made it look like a competitive sport. He walked into the classroom and was already sighing. Fred was upside down in his chair. George had 2 sugar quills stuffed into his ears, muttering about Silencio experiments. Or well, other way around. Lee was laughing, and Cedric was trying very hard to pretend he didn't know any of them. Morning, my little budgetary burdens, Cassian said. Cedric straightened immediately. Good morning, Professor. Fred and George saluted in tandem. Cassian narrowed his eyes. I assume you both know your names are not on this register twice because you are exceptional. We are not. Fred asked, mock wounded. Could have sworn it was an honor roll, George added. It is. You are honored to still be enrolled, Cassian said, flicking his wand toward the board. Also, if you write Gred and Forge on one more assignment, I will have your names legally changed. The twins gasped in delight. No, scratch that, Cassian continued flatly. You would enjoy it too much. I will tattoo your real names on your foreheads in fluorescent ink so you can't swap places to pull pranks anymore. The twins' smug grins vanished in perfect sync. Before anyone could cut in, Cassian rapped his knuckles on the desk. Quills out. Books optional. Brain cells mandatory. A pair of Gryffindors had already elbowed their way to a desk near the front. Kenneth Towler was chewing on the end of his quill. He smiled at them, which made a few flinch. All right, let's start with the history of the summer of 1990. When my precious students studied hard, trained even harder, right? He gave the room a quick sweep. Am I correct? Would be quite embarrassing if I had it wrong. I am a historian, after all. Fred raised a hand with mock solemnity. We did a lot of research, sir. Very academic. George discovered gravity. George nodded. Only briefly. It hit me in the face and ran off. Excellent, Cassian said. Truly the intellectual backbone of the era. Alicia snorted. Angelina didn't look up from her quill, just muttered, please don't encourage them. Cassian rested back against the desk, arms folded. Right, he said, I asked you to write me an 8-feet essay over the summer, and some of you actually delivered. Some more creatively than others. Fred was already grinning. George looked suspiciously innocent. I had great pleasure reading yours, Gred and Forge, Cassian went on, though I am still not sure why you submitted identical essays, just one written backwards. Did you assume that would count as originality? Because sadly, gentlemen, I am built in with Turnitin. Fred, or possibly George, raised a hand. What is Turnitin, sir? Cassian chuckled. It is, my good students, a ward that alerts me when someone plagiarizes their essays. Also comes with a handy feature that sends a howler to your mother. Angelina raised a hand without looking up from her notes. Did their mum get the howler? No, Cassian said, I thought I would save that joy for Christmas. A little festive drama never hurts. Fred leaned over to George. We need to rewrite the Yule Ball plan. Agreed. Less fire. More plausible deniability. Chapter 33, Coward. Cassian let the murmur roll for a few seconds before cutting through it. All right, pack it in. Now, beside the plagiarism, Cassian went on, arching a brow at the twins, the idea was novel. So, props. If mildly concerning. Cedric, great as always. Loved how you gave a new perspective on the Round Table era. Bit romanticized, but I will allow it. Cedric pecked his head, looking like he was handed a medal. Alicia, Cassian continued, pointing a finger her way, very solid defense of witches from the old era. Morgana being misunderstood was something we've been over, but you pulled in new sources. Nice touch. That bit about the royal scribes changing her titles posthumously? Very sharp. Alicia tried to look unaffected, but her quill twitched a little faster in her hand. Angelina, he said, flicking to the next name on his parchment, I liked the angle you took with magical sports history. No one ever covers the anti-Quidditch leagues during the purest backlash. Strong citations, bonus points for not making it boring. That is a gift. She grinned and muttered something to Alicia. Lee. Your essay was, ambitious. A snort from George. Lee straightened. How ambitious? Cassian held up the parchment. Let's see. Title, Why Merlin Would Have Hated Ministry, a case study in legislative incompetence. Fred and George applauded. You cited one source. Yourself. And I am fairly sure you made up the quote where Merlin said, and I quote, no more laws, only fire. Lee grinned. To be fair, that sounds like something he might have said. Possibly after a bottle of mead and one too many wand mishaps, Cassian muttered. Still, creativity noted. Try for actual history next time. He let the laughter settle before glancing at the last name on the list. Kenneth. Kenneth Towler looked up, still chewing the end of his quill. Yours was, well, it existed. That is a start. Kenneth gave him a thumbs up. Cassian tapped his desk to draw their attention and reset the mood. All right, history today, magical uprisings of the 9th century. Yes, that includes blood, betrayal, and more than one wizard who thought stuffing pixies in a cannon was a war strategy. Angelina leaned forward. Wait, they actually did that? Cassian nodded. Twice. Once in Bavaria, once in Somerset. Both times, the pixies revolted halfway through. Ever seen an entire cavalry unit taken down by laughing blue imps with bayonets? They watched with jaws slacking. You will, he added, wand already out. He cast Lumos Spectaculum, and a ripple of magic rolled out. A whole camp. Dozens of them. Weathered canvas flapping under phantom wind. Fire pits, spell-edged stones, banners stitched with house sigils and symbols long fallen out of favor. One banner bore a noble family crest, another had a gnarled wand twisted round a serpent. And others, sloopy ones. Second uprising of Thistle March, Cassian said, pacing between the rows. Year is 872. Somewhere near modern-day Wales. Very damp. Very loud. Very bloody. Led by someone called Hamish the Fork. Fred raised a hand. Was he named for the weapon? No, Cassian said, he had two front teeth like garden prongs. Very distinctive. Bit hard to take seriously when he shouted battle orders and whistled through the S. Twins laughed too loud, others snickered. Cassian paced to the front again. The tents began moving. Illusion people appeared, armored magics, wand belts strapped to their waists, grimy, shouting across a field that looked like it hadn't seen dry sun in weeks. Mud covered everything. One wizard tripped over his own cloak. Now, Cassian said, I could stand here and recite names and casualty numbers like Professor Binns did, or, I could teach you the one spell that changed how this battle was fought. He raised his wand and cast, Levitation Charm. A feather floated up from the desk. The class stared like he just insulted their collective intelligence. Seriously? Fred muttered, unimpressed. Very, Cassian replied. This, my tragically understimulated audience, is the spell that decided the second uprising of Thistle March. George gave him a skeptical look. They levitated the enemy into surrender. No. They levitated mud. Now he had their attention. Cassian turned, flicked his wand at the board. Letters scrawled themselves across it, blocky, muddy brown script that looked appropriately awful. Battle of Dunwither Field, 872 AD. Right. Picture it. You are Hamish the Fork, bad teeth, worse tactical planning. You got 24 half-trained magics, a few angry squibs with clubs, and absolutely no clue what you are doing. Opposite you? A fully staffed battalion. Uniforms. Enchanted armor. Budget. They even brought their own field latrine. Hamish, on the other hand, had a swamp. Angelina leaned forward. They fought in a swamp. Technically a moor. But it had rained for 6 days. So, yes, swamp. He strode to the middle of the room and drew a messy oval in the air with his wand. The illusion shimmered into life, fields of grass churned to sludge, tents tilting sideways, and wizard soldiers with very expensive boots sinking ankle-deep in bog water. Cassian paced beside it. Hamish realized he couldn't outduel them. So instead of aiming at the enemy, he aimed at the ground. Started lifting sections of the swamp and lobbing them like pies. Cedric squinted at the illusion. That is not how we were taught to use the levitation charm. No, because the curriculum was prepared by someone who has never been chased by an army of scouts across wet ground. Professor Flitwick is capable of doing so, but probably, never mind, Cassian said. Watch. He flicked his wand again. A figure, the illusion of Hamish, judging by the spiked teeth, swung his wand at a patch of earth. The mud rippled, rose in a thick, wet slab, then launched across the field like a catapult. It hit an enemy wizard mid-cast. They vanished under a splat the size of a sofa. Laughter broke across the classroom. Hamish leveraged combat levitation, Cassian said, turning to the class. Crude, sure. Inelegant. But no one expects you to weaponize the terrain. That gave his side the edge. Bought them time to retreat, regroup, and eventually broker a truce that kept their families from being arrested. Lee raised a hand. So the secret to surviving a magical war is, flinging mud. He looked at their faces and sighed, loud and long. I've been trying to teach you lot to think outside the box since last year, but clearly, I am up against a generational curse. Fred opened his mouth. No, Cassian said. Not a compliment. The twins leaned back like they just been told breakfast had been cancelled. Cedric looked thoughtful. Kenneth was chewing on his quill again. Wizards have been indoctrinated, yes, I said indoctrinated, into thinking spells are one note. Use them as they are taught. Say the Latin, do the swish, carry on. Rinse and repeat. It is pathetic. Cassian stepped away from the board and toward the center of the room. The illusion of muddy soldiers flickered and vanished with a lazy wave of his wand. In their place, he placed something entirely mundane. A plain cup. He set it on the ground like it meant something. This, he said, is a cup. Fred nudged George. Reckon he's finally cracked. Let's wait, George said, he might do a dance. Cassian ignored them. A very secret cup. Terribly magical. You all heard stories about enchanted objects, yes? One of them involved a cup and a name. He didn't know why, but the memory stuck. Something about a cup. His friends, old friends, Earth friends, talked about it in passing once. A tournament, maybe. Some magical event Harry Potter entered or didn't or wasn't supposed to. Something odd about an age line drawn around the goblet to keep out younger students. Or to keep out cheaters. Or both. It was hazy. Half a conversation buried under 20 years in a resurrection. But the line, that part stuck. I drew an age line around it. You need to put your name in it. How will you do it? The words echoed. Not his. Someone else's. Probably a grumpy wizard with a beard and a penchant for theatrics. The second years stared at it. He stared back at them. Fred was already squinting, as if trying to see if the cup would blink first. Cassian clapped his hands. Entertain me, yet. Let's pretend, for the sake of educational chaos, that this cup is magical. Hidden inside it is the secret to immortality. Or a good lasagna recipe. Take your pick. Cedric sat a bit straighter. Angelina narrowed her eyes. Fred raised a hand. Is it cursed? Not yet, Cassian said. Give it time. He circled the cup slowly. Now. You lot have heard of wards, yes? Magical boundaries. Barriers. Some are subtle, enchantments that nudge people away from areas they shouldn't be. Others are, louder. Traps. Explosions. Singing suits of armor. Lee perked up. Can we do the singing kind? No, Cassian said flatly. We are in a magical school. Not a musical. He stopped beside the cup. Come on, don't be shy. How will you put your name in it, when the age line keeps you out? He turned slightly after a long silence of frowns and squints. What, none of you ever fancied sneaking into something you weren't old enough for? God, I taught rocks with more curiosity. Angelina's hand twitched. We can't just cross it, right? Very good, Miss Johnson. No, you cannot. He pointed his wand at the floor. A ring of glowing gold edged itself around the cup, humming faintly. It was just a light illusion, of course. He couldn't cast an age line. Standard age ward. Won't kill you. Just gives you a zap and a lecture. Fred leaned forward. What if you jump in from the side? Go ahead, Cassian said, stepping back. We will scrape what is left of your dignity off the floorboards. Fred exchanged a look with George. Not it. Coward. Intact coward. Chapter 34, Age Line. Fred and George leaned in over their desk like a pair of kinmen about to forge a treaty with Mordor. Quills in hand, brows furrowed, they scribbled and muttered nonsense, scratched it out, then scribbled again, absolute chaos, but it was chaos with ambition. Occasionally one would snort or slap the other's hand away. That is not how veins work, George. It is if you enchant them, Fred. Don't question the magic. Cassian rested against the desk edge, watched the chaos, feeling like a biologist observing a nest of particularly ambitious weasels. Most of the others had taken a less, joint effort approach. Angelina already jotted down 3 methods, none of which involved explosions or impersonation. She looked like she worked out the cup's security schema and was halfway through devising a proper counter ritual. Alicia sat beside her, chewing the end of her quill. She wrote something, paused, crossed it out, then underlined something else twice like that would convince the cup to cooperate. Cedric was neatly sketching what looked suspiciously like a magical feedback circuit. Not bad. Bit textbook, but he clearly knew what he was doing. Wouldn't be surprised if he added a bibliography by the end of it. Not that it would work. Lee was leaned back, legs stretched, quill tapping against his lips. The sort of posture that screamed he was about to suggest we bribe the cup. Kenneth, bless him, was drawing a mustache on the cup with his quill. Cassian said nothing. Sometimes you had to let kids fail artistically. Eventually, Fred raised a hand. Not out of respect, just to demand attention. Sir, can we use an aging potion? Cassian shook his head. If the caster is thick enough to overlook that loophole, sure, might work. Once. Probably gets patched by next lesson. Anyone else? That opened the gates. Badly. Angelina raised her hand, cautiously polyjuice. Ah yes, he said, nothing says school charm like identity theft, a restricted potion, and a month of stirring someone else's toenail soup. You are 12. Try again. Lee looked up, get someone older to do it. Delegation. Clever. Also known as cheating. And completely possible. Right until the cup checks magical resonance and your name shows up with a lovely asterisk that says, actually submitted by a 6th year with a favor to cash in. Still, nice lateral thinking. Bit morally grey. He tapped the floor near the golden line with his foot. All right, he said, bit too loud to cut through whatever nonsense the twins were muttering now, I will bite. You lot have thrown a dozen ideas at the wall, and while I am enjoying this brainstorm of petty crime and questionable pody wondering, there is a better way. They stilled. Magic is a funny thing, he said, walking a slow circle around the cup, most of you treat spells like recipes. Say the words, do the flick, watch the sparks fly. Fred whispered, like cake, but dangerous. Cassian shot him a look. Exactly. And what happens when someone forgets the eggs? Explosion. Worse. Undercooked incantations. Nasty stuff. Alicia raised a brow. So, you are saying there is a different spell? No, Cassian said, I am saying free yourself from this limited thinking you've all been conditioned into. He turned on his heel and strolled to his desk. He drew 3 small pieces of parchments, scribbling random nonsense on blank slips. 3 versions of the same name. Neatly written in a way that would make his old schoolteacher shed a proud tear. He held them up. Watch and learn. The first he folded into a paper plane. Nothing magical. Nothing clever. Just a bit of primary school rebellion resurrected for higher education. He lobbed it. The plane soared. Not graceful, this wasn't some enchanted swan of the skies. It passed clean through the false age line and dropped neatly into the teacup with a plunk, quickly soaking into a shade of unappealing brown. Half the room just blinked. Especially the twins. Fred's jaw went slack. George leaned so far forward his quill fell off the desk. They looked somewhere between scandalized and spiritually betrayed. That is cheating, Fred muttered. It is worse, George said, still staring. It is obvious. Cassian tilted his head, watching the wet parchment sink. Yes, yes. The horror. A historian found a workaround that involved no illegal potions, identity theft, or magical age fraud. Truly, where is the fun? He picked up the second slip. This one, he said, is for the violent thinkers among you. Those who see a magical line and think, maybe I will just lob it really hard and hope it forgets to be magic for a second. Lee raised his hand. That is, basically my strategy for most things. Cassian tossed the paper ball. It sailed through the air, spun slightly mid-flight, then passed through the fake ward like it didn't exist. Straight into the cup. Another quiet splash. 2 for 2, Cassian said, brushing his hands off. Lee pointed at the line. Wait. So the age ward doesn't trigger if you are not touching it? Cassian shrugged. I don't know. Depends how clever the caster was. A fan, a gust, a loud sneeze, any of that ruins the trick. I am just showing you that no spell needed doesn't mean no thinking needed. He twirled the last parchment in his hand. Besides, if the line is testing age and nothing else, that bit of paper is older than all of us. The tree it came from probably watched Merlin sprout chest hair. A few snickers. Even Cedric cracked a smile. Cassian folded the third sleeve. Wand in hand, he cast, Wingardium Leviosa. The paper floated up, tilted slightly mid-air, then dipped over the golden glow of the fake ward and dropped into the cup with a soft rustle. 3 for 3. He treated himself to one slow, sarcastic clap. That, my dear devils, is the levitation charm. Not for feathers. Not for broomsticks. For everything else no one told you it could do. Fred and George were still staring at the cup, eyes wide open, as if the cup awakened them to reality. Fred broke first, dragging a hand down his face. You are telling us, all those fancy counterspells, all that charm work, and we could have just throw it. Throw it. Levitate it. Catapult it with a teaspoon, Cassian said, deadpan. Angelina smirked. Honestly, it is clever. Clever. George hissed. It is heresy. Lee raised a hand. So you are saying we should start flinging stuff at magical wards? Cassian glared at him, considering flinging him to the cup. I am saying, if you can't unleash your imagination, you will spend your whole life tossing the same 5 spells around and get flattened by someone with half your talent and one good idea. The class fell silent. Fred gave a whistle. That is bleak. Accurate, Cassian said. And historical. He pushed off the desk, walked back toward the illusion. Every war, he went on, every rebellion, every mad little spell that turned the tide, none of it came from following instructions. It came from someone going, all right, what if I did this, and it doesn't explode? Take Thistle March, he said, stepping back toward the board, showing the screen of light, where a mud-splattered battlefield, a banner half-ripped. Hamish the Fork wasn't in a dueling manual. He had no pedigree. No noble wand lineage. But he did have a swamp, and a very strong sense of mischief. Lee snorted. My kind of wizard. Cassian pointed at him without missing a beat. Exactly. Lee, in 20 years, you will be the subject of a footnote in a minor conflict, and someone like me will stand up in a room like this and say, this lad expanded the limits of what he was taught. Thank God for that. Fred leaned into George. I want a footnote. You want a footnote? Only if it is scandalous, George whispered. Gentlemen, Cassian said, if you live to be more than a footnote, I will be shocked. And if it involves pyrotechnics, I will be disappointed if I am not invited. The twins grinned, their quills already sketching something that Cassian was sure would end with either applause or expulsion. Possibly both. Then he turned to the board. Now, since you all proven you can levitate things other than feathers and your classmates' dignity, he said, tapping the slate, we will take this charm a step further. The word appeared in chalk, Wingardium Leviosa. Under it, another word formed, tactical application. Someone tell me, Cassian said, what is the limit of this spell? Cedric raised a hand. Wait. Good guess. Still wrong. Fred. Is it imagination? Cassian gave a mock gasp. Was that genuine insight? Sweet Lord. Mark the calendar. A few chuckles rolled around the room. Fred clapped, solemn. George whispered something about it being a historical event already. Cassian pressed on. The only limit is yourself. Your imagination. Everything else is just detail. Math. Formulas. If all magics united and cast Wingardium Leviosa together, we could stop Earth from spinning. Blank stares. Right. That went straight over their heads. Not just over, soaring, comet trail level. Cassian didn't even bother trying to explain planetary motion, axial tilt, or why Earth wasn't just a floating plate held up by particularly stubborn oxen. Instead, he tapped the side of his wand lightly against his palm and sighed. You are to write a 2-feet-long essay, he said. On unconventional applications of Wingardium Leviosa. And as I said before, no, I am not your charms teacher. You are free to skip it. I am not grading these. He paused before adding, it is for your own good. Goodbye. Fred raised a hand like he was hailing a cursed taxi. Define unconventional. You will know it when you accidentally float your brother's rat through a ceiling, Cassian said, already walking toward the door. If that helps. George muttered, it does. Charlie is scary. Cassian slipped out for a moment of peace. 2-feet essays should keep them busy till tomorrow. He could practically see Fred and George now, hunched over some brainstormed monstrosity involving levitating pies, or possibly levitating people inside pies. Wouldn't be the worst idea he ever read. Chapter 35, Somewhere Else. A knock hit his door but Cassian didn't look up. If that is you, Fred, tell George the first am not giving extra credit for combat baking. The door creaked open anyway. Bath's Haida stuck her head in. Combat baking. Don't ask, he muttered. How is the rune mangling going? She stepped in, closing the door behind her with her boot. There were fresh streaks of ink up one sleeve, smudged in a way that suggested she wiped her quill there more than once without realizing, as she always did. She crossed the room and sat on his lap like that was where she was headed all morning. He didn't say anything, just looped one arm around her waist and let his hand rest against her lap. It was fine, she muttered, making herself comfortable, like he was furniture. 6th and 7th years are still manageable. The ones who passed their owls actually want to be there, so at least they shut up and listen. 3rd years though, they are a problem. Too much optimism. Think if they carve a single rune right, they will cause an explosion. She shifted, drawing his other hand to her thigh without really thinking about it. 4th years forgot everything over the summer. Whole term reset. Like someone obliviated them in June. Ah yes, Cassian murmured, the sacred cycle of academic regression. They cram, they pass, they promptly flush it like spoiled potion. Happens every bloody year. They are unbearable, she said, leaning her cheek against his shoulder. You are describing teenagers. She just snorted in response. He ran his fingers along the ink on her sleeve, pausing at one smear near her elbow. What did you throw at them? Runic function breakdown. Simple chain spells. Conditional logic. Barely anything. Half of them still drew everything backwards. You didn't hex anyone. Tempted. Cassian kissed the crown of her head. You've gone soft. She snorted. You are one to talk. He huffed a laugh. They sat like that for a bit. Her thumb brushed the inside of his wrist. His hand rested warm against her hip. Somewhere in the castle, a bell rang. He didn't care which one. She tilted her head, speaking against his jaw. You are getting a reputation. Always do. What is it this time? Revolutionary? Rogue educator? Wand smuggler? She looked up at him with a grin, eyes a little too smug for someone claiming exhaustion. The young, dashing professor who swooped the helpless rune expert off her feet. Cassian scoffed. Helpless? You stabbed a 6th year's essay with your quill last year. He drew an Y instead of. That is a death rune. She nudged his chest with a knuckle. Which, ironically, I considered using. Might have improved his grammar, he muttered, mostly to himself. The Slytherin girls are obsessed. Half of them are convinced you used a love potion. She said with a laugh. Cassian chuckled. Brilliant. Was wondering when that rumor would start. Thought I would at least earn it with a dramatic hallway kiss or something. You do walk like you got a dramatic song playing every time you enter a room. I do, he said, it is called exhaustion in E minor. She laughed against his shoulder. How are the darlings of 4th year runes? He asked. Collectively? Useless. One of them tried to translate an Icelandic binding glyph with a textbook from Bose batons. Half the class copied him. Oh good, he said. Cultural misunderstanding and academic laziness are 2 core values. They think runes are a puzzle game. Plug in a few symbols, and poof, enchanted tea set. He shrugged. A rather genius muggle calls it natural selection. Bath's Haida blinked at him like he just started speaking gobbledygook again. Cassian sighed and leaned his head back against the chair with a quiet thunk. Right. Add Darwin to the list. Along with rockets, jet engines, microwaves, and basic risk assessment. She squinted. Natural, what? Selection, he repeated. The scientific concept, not a game show. Muggles figured out survival favors the ones who adapt. Change. Learn or you die, and those who adjusted carry on. She snorted softly. We have that in magic too. It is called don't stand in front of a basilisk. No, that is called instinct or reason. Or running for your life, he said. Muggles built entire systems around this. Genetics, evolution, breeding charts. Though some of them also thought cucumbers cured depression, so swings and roundabouts. Bath's Haida gave him a long look. How do you know all this? I read books. Big, terrifying ones with no moving pictures. He shook his head with a laugh. Also, I lived a whole other life, but that is a longer story. He added in his mind, before sighing, in short, your rune kids failing their logic exams is just Darwin in action. She looked mildly horrified. You are saying I should let them fail. I am saying they are choosing extinction with every reversed binding rune. Who am I to interfere with the natural order? She dropped her forehead against his collarbone. You are the worst. Statistically improbable, he muttered into her hair. I am at least in the top 20%. So, tell me, she said after a beat of silence. About your 2nd years. You looked smug when I came in. He rolled his eyes, rant brewing within him as if was waiting for anyone with ears to ask. The way magics think is limited. Rigid, boxed in. You got to swish the wand just so, pronounce the syllables like a bleeding opera singer, and cast the spell exactly the way the first bloke did it 1,000 years ago. God forbid you get creative. Break the mold and suddenly you are reckless. Irresponsible. Possibly dark. This sort of generational cloning? It kills imagination. Nature trims the fat. Stop using a part long enough, and it withers. I think magics have finally evolved into losing their bloody imagination. Bath's Haida murmured something unintelligible against his shoulder. You sound personally betrayed. I am, Cassian muttered. I drew an imaginative age line around a cup and asked them to put their names in. Their first idea? Polyjuice or aging potion? She scoffed. They are solid choices. I would probably use runes, but... She waved a hand at herself, occupational hazard. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, how about just throwing a bloody paper over the line? You know, the kind of thinking that doesn't involve stealing someone's toenails or waiting a month to digest shame. She blinked. Took a second to answer. It sounded silly, but she was caught off guard. Not by the idea, exactly, more by how simple it was. Obvious, even. Toss a slip of paper across a line instead of crawling through magical red tape? Ridiculous. And completely valid. The problem wasn't the idea itself. It was the instinct. Every kid in that classroom had been taught, formally or not, that if something couldn't be solved with magic, it had to be ancient, cursed, or written by Merlin's personal assistant in blood and dragon bone ink. Anything else was a trick. Bath's Haida looked faintly scandalized. So, you are saying the answer to a magical challenge was not magic? Oh no. I am saying the answer was gravity. That terrifying Muggle concept. Dropping things. Wild, I know. He sighed. It wasn't that they were stupid. Just, trained. Indoctrinated, really. The same way he would flinch at a dragon instead of trying to cast a shield, or, hypothetically, apparate away, if he could, because somewhere deep in the spine, that is what the body thought survival looked like. Pure reflex. Brains were muscles. Neglect them, they shrivel. Magics, far as he's seen, had spent centuries lifting the same 5 mental weights. Spell, counterspell, charm, rinse, repeat. Any idea that didn't start with a wand and end in Latin got tossed in the bin. He didn't blame them. Hogwarts, the Ministry, even bloody bedtime stories, they all ran on a script. One way to win. One answer to the riddle. And if you tried anything else? You were reckless. Dangerous. Or worse, a Muggle-born. Bath's Haida didn't say anything at first. Just blinked slowly like someone trying to process the idea of butter that didn't come from a charmed churn. Cassian watched the mental cogs churn behind her eyes, faintly amused. You are saying, she said eventually, they failed, because they were trained to fail. Not trained to fail, Cassian said. But yes. No one tells them to think sideways. They are told what wand movement to use, how many flicks, and when to say the incantation. You try anything else, they act like you've slapped the founders. She frowned. It is not that rigid. Name one Hogwarts subject that encourages rule-breaking. A pause. Divination. She tried. Please. That is not a class, it is a lottery. She snorted a laugh, leaning into him more. So what, you are going to retrain their instincts? Teach them all to throw things at wards instead of using their wands. I am not trying to turn them into magical gorillas. He shook his head slightly, I just want them to stop treating spells like bloody vending machines. Tap the button, get the effect. Bath's Haida tapped his wrist idly. You know this won't win you points with the parents. Good, he said. They are the ones who need deprogramming first. She didn't argue. Just let out a long breath and went quiet. It struck her again, how different Cassian was. Not just the dry jokes or the way he taught like he was holding court in a pub rather than a classroom, but at the root of him. If he wasn't a Rosier, and if she didn't know him from school, she would have put money on him being Muggle-born. Maybe not even a bet. Just a fact. One of those quirks you spotted after the 5th time he asked a question that didn't belong in their world. Even back in that cave, when the ceiling had started to give, her wand had been in her hand before she blinked. Instinct. Prodigo. Classic. His hadn't even left his coat. He just grabbed her arm and yanked her sideways, like instinct didn't start at spell work but at move or die. It made her feel stupid, later. All that training, all those drills, and the man next to her moved faster without even drawing. He thought in straight lines. Sometimes brutally so. And it wasn't just caves. She was often baffled how Cassian could navigate Muggle infrastructure like he built it. Just moved through the mess like he was born with a street map stitched behind his eyes. There was also traveling. She used Muggle trains in Norway with him. Straight through the barriers, picked the right platform like it was second nature. Tube map lit behind glass, half the colors rubbed off, and he barely glanced at it. She was shocked to see how evolved Muggle transportation was. Last time she boarded one, it was all steam and creaking metal, every carriage rattling like it might come undone if someone sneezed too hard. Like Hogwarts Express, but worse. Now they went underground. Underground. She read about tubes before, but when they stepped into one, she stood still for a full 10 seconds trying to understand how the bloody ceiling wasn't caving in. It didn't help that the train shot forward like it was being chased. No horses. No steam. Just noise and a blur of light and something that felt very much like being kidnapped by a steel coffin on wheels. She gripped the overhead bar the whole time, silently reciting every defensive rune she knew. He just sat, legs stretched, reading a book as if the screeching metal tube wasn't dragging them through the belly of the earth. She made it 2 stops before she bolted out like a spooked Niazel. Cassian, of course, had loved every second. He had laughed for 10 solid minutes. Didn't even make it to Berg, he wheezed. Brilliant. I am putting that on your grave. Shut up, she snapped, dragging herself away from the edge of the platform. You can't tell me that wasn't cursed. Nothing is cursed, you just don't trust anything that moves without a wand. Of course I bloody don't. That thing didn't even puff. He grinned, utterly smug. That is called engineering. Bathsheba glared, pulling her bag up like it might shield her from further nonsense. You are a Rosier. You shouldn't even know that word. There were little slips like that all the time. Moments where he referenced things she didn't understand, offhand mentions of nuclear power, of satellites and the internet like they were old family friends. He didn't flaunt it, just said them like everyone knew what they were. And now, curled on his lap in his room that smelled faintly of ink and whatever coffee he was hoarding, she could feel it again. Like his brain was wired a bit differently, built somewhere else. Chapter 36, Staff Meeting. Bathsheba and Cassian had to get up eventually. Lunch didn't wait, and neither did the timetable. A quick rinse, half a sandwich, and 1 tea later, Cassian was back in the classroom. This time, it was Ravenclaw and Slytherin second years, same lesson, new flavors of headache. Ravenclaws, to no one's surprise, were better at thinking sideways. Not perfect, but they at least poked the edges of things before throwing themselves into the center. One of them had actually asked if the age line was physical or illusory. Slytherins, on the other hand, didn't just detest the lack of wand work, they looked personally insulted. As though anything that didn't sparkle or require a Latin incantation was beneath them. The idea that a spell could be circumvented by physics? Blasphemy. Cassian watched them glare at the challenge, getting offended. One of them muttered about muggle tricks. He didn't say anything. Just gave them a long, slow look until the room remembered how silence could be weaponized. They tried everything else, of course. Tried overcasting detection charms. Tried siphoning the boundary with mirrored spells. One even asked, dead serious, if the answer involved using a cursed dagger. It didn't. One Ravenclaw girl, Callahan, just stood back and threw her slip of paper with a little flick. The parchment floated down, landed in the cup, and stayed. Half the room froze. Cassian cheered with 2 fists in the air. Great thinking. 20 points. The Slytherins were glaring daggers at Callahan, their collective dignity crumpling faster than her parchment had. One boy looked like he might start drafting an official complaint to Salazar's portrait. The Ravenclaws, meanwhile, began exchanging rapid-fire whispers, already plotting 6 more ways to break the age line. This was the fun bit, not the spell work but the moment when one idea cracked the dam. The moment they realized magic wasn't the only tool they had. All in all, it was better. Cassian stuck to the strategy that worked last year, teach them history, slip in an old spell they already knew, and let their own brains do the heavy lifting. Simple. Efficient. A good way to sneak mastery under the radar. Most of them didn't notice they were getting better at the basics until they were doing it sideways, blindfolded, and probably mid-duel. He reckoned an ancient variation was close by. Should be, with the way the stats were nudging up every time someone had a halfway decent idea. The problem was, he would start seeing visions again. And those were never pleasant. Always damp, usually underground, and full of screaming. Sometimes his, okay mostly his, which was rude. The first month ticked by before Cassian even noticed, mostly because he spent the bulk of it trying to keep teenagers from setting their desks on fire in the name of academic curiosity. Somehow, the second years had collectively decided that the correct way to test ancient spells was to throw furniture at them. He was beginning to suspect the twins had started it, but no solid proof, yet. By the end of September, he settled into a rhythm. Older years were a harder nut, slower to break habit, but they were getting there, and the more they got used to his style, the easier it was to Kurukite into thinking outside of the box. Then came the summons. He was halfway through stealing one of Bathsheba's shortbread biscuits when the parchment dropped on his desk, folded sharp with McGonagall's handwriting on top. Staff meeting, he said, glancing at the time. That is new. Baths Haida looked up from her essay pile, quill still in hand. We had them occasionally. Aurora mentioned Dumbledore might revive the habit. Thrilling. He pocketed the biscuit and followed her out. He held the door open for her at the staff room, eyebrows raised. Place your bets, actual meeting or secret intervention for Sybil. 5 sickles on Ketleben requesting leave again, she muttered. Cassian stepped in after her. Most of the staff were already there. McGonagall stood near the long table, parchment in hand, brows furrowed, meaning someone had irritated her before the meeting even began. Probably Snape. Flitwick waved cheerfully from his seat near the end as Cassian's eyes landed on one of the new faces. Sikander smiled when he saw them. Cassian gave him a 2-fingered salute and dropped into the empty chair beside him. Settling in? He asked. So far, Sikander said. Though one student did ask if the internet was a type of magical net that detects intruders. Cassian snorted. Tell them it is worse. It knows what shoes you want before you do. He then blinked. Did the government start tracking people through it? Probably not yet. It was the age of floppy disks and questionable mustaches. 90s internet was noisy, patchy, barely useful. Much like Quirrell, Cassian got on well with Aerith as well. The Muggle studies professors were the closest thing to sanity this castle offered. Or at least the only ones who didn't think electricity could bite. Well, it shocked, still. Cassian nudged his chair back. So, who won? You or the second year's theory that microwaves work on runes? Sikander smirked. Lost that round. And they are convinced Telly is dark magic. Hard to argue with that. I've seen EastEnders. McGonagall cleared her throat. Right. Meeting. Cassian straightened, smiling sheepishly at her. She glanced over the rim of her glasses, gave him the kind of look that could turn oak to mulch, and went back to the parchment in her hand. Now that we are all here, she said, I will make this brief. Headmaster requested an early term review. We will be receiving visitors from the board next week. A groan from Ketleben cut her off. Not subtle at all. Cassian spotted Hooch elbowing him under the table. McGonagall continued without missing a beat. Which means your classrooms, materials, and lesson logs should be in order. That includes proper safety protocols. No exceptions. Snape didn't move, but the way his mouth twitched was practically a monologue. McGonagall turned her head. Professor Snape, if you have something to add. No, he said, dry as always. Only that I find the board's timing consistent. Cassian tilted his head. Consistently awful. Aurora and Flitwick chuckled, a few others failed to hide it. Consistently inconvenient, Snape replied, eyes flicking sideways. Sikander leaned closer. Does this happen often? Once a year, Cassian muttered. Twice, if someone's kid turns into a turnip during a lesson. McGonagall gave him another look. Cassian smiled back like he didn't notice. She rolled on. There's also been a formal complaint. From a parent. That quieted the room a bit. Not naming names, she went on, but suffice it to say, if you are assigning spells that result in taming livestock, perhaps reconsider your methods. Ketleben looked up. Oh, come on. It was a niffler. No one believed that, Flitwick piped in, flipping a page. It mooed. Cassian sipped his tea to hide the grin. McGonagall pushed on, staring at Cassian. Lastly, a reminder to review your curriculum if you've introduced significant deviation from standard NEWT preparation. He didn't rise to that. He just slowly reached over and stole Sikander's biscuit. Baths Haida, across the table, arched a brow. Professor Rosier. McGonagall insisted. Cassian looked up. Yes. I trust your materials align with the new ministry guidelines. He gave her his most innocent face. Of course, Deputy Headmistress. They are all proper and enlightening, but not enough to turn them against. Baths Haida kicked his shin under the table. Cassian paused mid-sentence, winced slightly, then cleared his throat and gave McGonagall a freshly polished smile. She did not return it. Just turned her attention back to her notes. Good, she said crisply. Then I trust there will be no further issues. She gave one last glance over her glasses before moving on to Flitwick's section of the table. Professor Flitwick, I believe you had something to report regarding the charms curriculum. Cassian slouched a bit lower in his seat, casually nudging Bathshata's boot with the side of his own in retaliation. She didn't look over, just reached for her quill like she hadn't just committed shin-based assault. Cold. The meeting went on. Flitwick launched into some new safety measures for summoning spells. Apparently a fifth year had nearly pulled a chandelier down while aiming for a teacup. Ketlaban snored, loudly, then pretended he sneezed. Cassian zoned out for a bit. Not out of boredom, exactly, he was more preoccupied trying to remember whether he left that experimental rune map in the drawer or on the windowsill. If the board caught a glimpse, he would be writing apology letters until summer. That thing insulted. Beside him, Sikander was doodling in the margin of his notepad. It looked like a stick figure being zapped by a toaster. Eventually, McGonagall wrapped it all up with her usual steel-spined efficiency. Lesson logs are to be submitted by Friday. Please ensure any significant deviations from ministry guidelines are clearly annotated and justified. That includes you, Professor Rosier. Cassian gave her a two-fingered salute. Would I ever leave you hanging? Yes, she said, without looking up. Meeting adjourned. The staff scattered like students after a surprise quiz, leaving Cassian, Bathshata, Sikander, Trelawney, Septima, Sinistra, and Snape lingering. Snape, naturally, pretended he wasn't part of the room. He had a stack of third-year essays out, quill held like a weapon, eyes locked on parchment that looked suspiciously blank from Cassian's angle. He didn't blink. Definitely wasn't reading anything. Cassian slouched further into his chair. I think he is waiting for the ink to rearrange itself into better answers. Bathshata didn't look up from her cup. Be nice. I am. That was admiration. Trelawney, from the far corner where the lighting was 2 notches too dramatic, swirled her teacup and muttered something about energies shifting. No one asked which ones. Chapter 37, Not That Name. Sikander kicked his chair round to face Cassian more fully. All right, tell me, what is the deal with you and the second years? Cassian shrugged. I gave them a cup and a boundary line. Told them to get their names in. And they immediately tried to commit identity fraud or commit potions-based self-harm. Bathshata leaned forward a little. He is annoyed they didn't throw anything. Snape's quill stilled mid-air. Sikander blinked. Throw. Paper, Cassian said. Float it in. Gravity does the rest. The spell never said they couldn't. Trelawney sniffed. A cup that accepts offerings, the imagery is potent. Sinistra smirked. Please tell me someone tried to crawl through. Oh, absolutely. One Slytherin genuinely asked if stabbing the line might weaken it. Like wards bleed. Sikander laughed. Inventive. Concerning, Cassian said. But I will take the initiative. Snape finally moved. So you mocked their attempts and praised the one who used a muggle workaround. Cassian tilted his head. You say that like I should feel bad. You should feel accurate. Your exercise wasn't about magical theory. It was about tricking children into looking stupid. Cassian smiled. No trickery involved. I asked them to solve a problem. They assumed the answer had to be dramatic and magical. That is on their training. Snape squinted. Your teaching methods are unorthodox. Good. I seen the orthodox ones. Half the class can't name 3 founders without picturing chocolate frog cards. Snape's expression fixed somewhere between vague disdain and active offense. So you are teaching them to ignore magic to fix that? Cassian shrugged. I am teaching them to use their brain before their wand. If that is a crime, lock me up. You made your stance clear. But Hogwarts has a curriculum for a reason. Yet. And it hasn't changed since dragonhide robes were in fashion. Snape's mouth twitched. Possibly a sneer. Possibly just his face reacting to the word fashion. You were always this arrogant. Cassian didn't even flinch. Doubt you would know me well enough. I was a first year when you were off brooding in 7th. Snape's expression flattened. Even in your first year, you walked like you were the Prince of Slytherin. Cassian shrugged. I was young, spoiled, and very impressed by how I sounded. It happens. I've changed. You, meanwhile, have maintained your commitment to being a major git. A snort came from the other end of the room, Sinistra, barely muffled. Snape ignored it. Your games will catch up to you. Oh, probably, Cassian said. But I am charming, so they will take longer. Snape turned back to his papers like he was done. Not defeated. Just bored of the flavor. Cassian let it drop. He wasn't here to win points, and he didn't particularly fancy digging up whatever festering opinion Snape still held over teenage Cassian. He hated old Cassian more than Snape did anyway. Baths Haida nudged his foot again under the table, not looking up. More of a don't start than a nice one. Septima glanced up from her book, bringing subject back to second years. Did they really think the ward could be intimidated? Cassian raised a finger. No, no. That was just not. He claimed there were faint whispers arguing when he stood near it. Sikander raised a brow. Were there? I might have added a bit of pizzazz to the light illusion. Just a little bit to make the cup shimmer if someone got too close. Baths Haida sipped her tea with a look suggesting she was weighing whether she should bother finishing it or chuck the cup at his head. You will traumatize them. Cassian gasped. I would not do such a thing. My intentions are so pure, unicorns would feel ashamed. She stared at him. He stared back, unrepentant. If you weren't a professor, you would be a problem. I am both, he said, grinning. Multi-talented. She muttered something into her teacup that sounded very unprofessional. Probably accurate, though. Cassian turned back to Sikander. Anyway, the whole point was to see how they would handle a problem without being spoon-fed a solution. Guess what they did? Drew blood and wept. Close. They tried every spell in the book and then some not in the book. One of them actually wanted to bring out a charm designed to bypass dragon wards. For a cup. Baths Haida cut in. What he is not saying is that the Ravenclaw solved it. Hey, Cassian said. Only one did and she was a Muggle-born, thank you very much. The rest were halfway through writing to their great-aunt to borrow cursed heirlooms. Cassian lowered his voice slightly. The worst part? They looked insulted it didn't need a wand. Probably felt cheated, Sikander said. Cassian scoffed. Good. That is the first step towards recovery. Next day, Cassian was visited by a student he liked to tease a lot. He looked up from his grading stack, half-marked essays in a very artistic attempt at drawing Helga Hufflepuff as a badger, just in time to catch a flash of wild hair and a scowl that could scare thunderclouds. Nymphadora. What a pleasant surprise, how may I help you? She stopped in the doorway like she was bracing for impact. Her fists clenched. Professor R, can you not call me that? Please. He tapped his pen against his chin. Depends on why you are here. If it is interesting, I may stop calling you that, for a week. She looked like she might bite him. It is Tonks. Everyone calls me Tonks. Yes, yes, he waved a hand. And some people call jam conserve, but we can't stop society from collapsing. Professor, she said, with a warning tone that had all the weight of a kitten threatening an easel. Fine. Tonks. There. That cost me a sliver of my soul. She marched forward, pulled out the nearest chair, and dropped into it. Her eyes, always the giveaway, were darting. Restless and fiery purple. You are clever, right? Tonks said, fingers laced. I mean, you teach us to think outside the box. I saw how it helped others. And me too. I got better at a bunch of spells thanks to that. Cassian raised a hand, if this is you buttering me up, continue. I like it. Bonus points if you add how devastatingly handsome I am. She groaned, slumping forward till her forehead thudded against the edge of his desk. It wasn't pity. He nudged a parchment aside with the tip of his pen, pulling another one. Go on, then. What is the actual request? She didn't look up right away. Just sighed into the table. Then, quietly said, I was wondering if you could help me with, you know. With my condition. Cassian froze mid-scribble. He set the pen down and gave her a look. Metamorphomagus, he asked. That condition? She nodded. Yeah. That one. He crossed one leg over the other. Tonks, you are one of about 2 people on this continent who can bend their face like toffee and still moan about homework. What is the problem? She sat up, that is just it. I can do faces, hair, height, whatever. That stuff is easy. But it is all reflex. I don't control it. Not really. Half the time it is just mood swings. And the other half? Guesswork. Stressy days? I grow a beard. Sad? I go grey. Angry? I turn into my mum. And that is not a therapy session I am ready for. Cassian blinked. Sounds like an identity crisis with bonus features. She huffed. It is a bloody nuisance, what is? Professor Vector caught me yesterday mid-argument with my nose turning into a hooked monstrosity. He coughed into his fist. I am serious, she snapped. Everyone thinks it is hilarious, or cool, or like, I dunno, some kind of party trick. But I can't sit still in my own skin. I keep changing even when I don't mean to. I thought maybe, with how you teach, maybe you would know how to help. He studied her. She was sitting dead still, jaw clenching, fingers curled together like if she moved too much she might turn into something she would regret. Have you talked to Madame Pomfrey? He asked. She shrugged. She gave me grounding charms and a breathing exercise. Helped for about 5 minutes. I nearly turned blue in potions trying to calm down. Cassian tapped the edge of the desk, thinking. All right. Not a healer. But you are not asking for potions, are you? No, she said. I need structure. Like what you gave the others. He considered it. Not impossible. Just tricky. This wasn't a spell to tweak or a rune to draw. This was identity. And Tonks wasn't wrong, most people did treat her ability like a parlor trick. Entertaining, but shallow. No one had probably ever taught her how to master it. Right, Cassian said, standing up. He circled around the desk. I am not an expert in magical transformations. But... He gave her a look, one brow raised. I got a few ideas rattling about. Give me a bit to think. Tonks looked up, hopeful but stiff, like she didn't want to get her expectations up for nothing. You won't tell anyone. Only if you turn into McGonagall and catch me off guard. Then I reserve the right to scream and point. She snorted, pushing herself upright. I would pay to see that. Cassian tapped the side of his head. Careful. I might invoice you for emotional damage. He stepped past her, grabbed a spare scroll off the side table and started scribbling something down. Notes, thoughts, nonsense, it would sort itself later. He handed it over without looking up. Start tracking it. Times, changes, what set it off? Think like a curse breaker for your own face. Patterns matter. She took the scroll, brow creased. Isn't that? I dunno, too simple. If it works, it works. Doesn't need to explode or glow. Chapter 38, A Rosier. A few weeks later, the peace in Cassian office was shattered when Flitwick barged in. The board is here to inspect, he squeaked, are you prepared? Cassian groaned as he shoved back his chair. Of course they are. He grabbed his coat off the backrest and muttered something about cursed timing under his breath. By the time he stepped out into the corridor, the voices had already reached him. A small entourage was sweeping through the halls, all cloaks and polished boots. At the center of the group, a figure stood out. Lucius Malfoy was striding ahead, cane tapping lightly against the stone as if to let anyone with ears to know he had, indeed, arrived. His platinum blonde hair gleamed like it was waxed that morning, and the faint sneer on his lips said he was waiting for this moment. Ah, Professor Rosier. Lucius's drawl cut across the corridor as soon as he caught sight of him. How delightful to see you, still standing. Cassian raised 2 fingers in a lazy salute. Watcher, Uncle Lucius. Lucius scoffed faintly and strode ahead. Flitwick hurried along behind him, muttering under his breath about lesson plans and inspection forms. Cassian trailed at a comfortable distance, hands in his coat pockets. Why are you so bloody casual? Flitwick hissed under his breath, half running to keep up. Cassian shrugged. I am a Rosier. Flitwick faltered mid-step. Ah. Right. The green grass patriarch walked along Lucius. The man was all sharp lines and thinning silver hair, the sort who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. Lucius probably dragged the rest. Thankfully, Magnus wasn't among them. Cassian wasn't in the mood to dance verbal circles around that old stubborn coot today. Lucius didn't bother to glance back. You certainly made yourself comfortable here, dear nephew. Dumbledore's favorite pet, from what I hear. Cassian's lips twitched. Oh, I wouldn't say favorite. More like the odd spice he sprinkles in just to make people wonder if the dish is poisoned. Lucius only huffed dismissively, not bothering to answer. Board business was board business, wandering the halls like they were founders. Fair enough, most of them were established magicians. Powerful ones too. But that only made it worse. Half these people had either openly or quietly supported Voldemort. And now they were here, scrutinizing the next generation's education like it was their sacred duty. Cassian didn't know what was worse, Dumbledore letting them in or the Ministry pretending they weren't a threat. They paused outside Bathsheda's classroom. One of the witches, tall, hawk-faced, reached for the door handle. Cassian stepped in front of the door. "Class is in session. You lot aren't bloody Ofsted inspectors." The hawk-faced witch froze. Lucius clicked his cane to the ground, sharply. "Dear nephew, it is our duty to inspect the quality of classes. I shouldn't have to remind you of that." Cassian's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course not, dear uncle. But this happens to be a rune class. If you barge in now, there is a fair chance at least one rune will explode if anyone is startled. Might be a small one. Might take off your eyebrows. If you are desperate to inspect, feel free to sit in before the lesson starts." Lucius's lip curled, but he didn't move. Green grass cleared his throat. "I see no harm in waiting." Cassian gave him a nod. Wise man. They sat in on a few more classes that afternoon, trailing each other like vultures in expensive cloaks. Poor Trelawney nearly cried under their stares. When it was time for his, Cassian rapped the board with the edge of his wand as the seventh years filled the room. "Right, eyes front. This isn't a Renaissance portrait, though God knows the hairstyles are criminal enough. What you are looking at is the court of King Gwendar, circa 1423. And these," he gestured at the cluster of overdressed figures whispering around the throne, "are the finest collection of magical advisors ever to ruin a kingdom without lifting a single wand." A few students chuckled under their breath. "Weasley," Cassian called, pointing to the Gryffindor boy near the back, "if you were king, would you listen to that lot?" Charlie frowned. "Depends, are they actually competent?" Cassian grinned. "That is the twist, they weren't. They spent more time squabbling over titles and elbowing each other for influence than, oh, I don't know, protecting the kingdom from a plague of bloodthirsty creatures. By the time the king realized, his magical defenses were a joke, his treasury was bleeding gold, and half his advisors had buggered off with cursed heirlooms." Tonks raised a hand. "So what happened? Did someone finally hex them?" Cassian shrugged. "Not quite. One clever healer put a curse-breaking clause in the council's charter and banished the lot. Too late, though, kingdom collapsed in a fortnight." Moral of the story. Andre piped up from the Ravenclaw side, "Don't trust sycophants." "Close," Cassian agreed. "Don't surround yourself with idiots who value their own pockets over the state of your wards." "And yes, Andre, sycophants count double." Cassian spent nearly the whole class staring straight at the Board of Governors, as he explained in painstaking detail how incompetent advisors had toppled empires. Watching Lucius barge out with the rest huffing behind him was almost better than tea. Almost. Victory. Petty, but satisfying. He would take it. The board didn't linger after that. They left a few notes of caution, scattered advice for the professors, and a chest full of pride for having done their part. Flitwick and Sprout caught Cassian just as he was stepping out of the classroom. "You are going to get yourself fired, Professor Rosier," Sprout said with a sigh. Cassian chuckled, completely unbothered. Flitwick gave a small shrug. "He is a Rosier." Sprout's brows lifted, and then she nodded in understanding. "Ah. Right." Cassian smirked, waving his hands without turning back. "Anyway, if the board didn't like my methods, they shouldn't have sat in on my lesson," he said. "And if Lucius Malfoy chokes on his own ego because I compared him to a court jester, well, I will sleep soundly." Flitwick's lips twitched, but he said nothing. Sprout pressed her lips together, half amused, half exasperated. "Cassian, honestly. One of these days, that sharp tongue of yours will land you in a cauldron of trouble you can't wiggle out of." Cassian looked over his shoulder, grin widening. "And until then, I intend to enjoy myself thoroughly." He disappeared down the corridor, leaving the two professors exchanging looks. 2 weeks later, he prepared everything he needed. Or, well, prepared was generous. He couldn't cast half the spells he was meant to demonstrate, but he could hold chalk, so really, that made him a solid 5 steps ahead of Binns. When Tonks turned up, it wasn't to the classroom. It was his room. Not his office. His actual living space. She shoved the door open, froze. Her gaze darted over the chaos, books teetering near a kettle, a lone biscuit trapped under a paperweight, and Bathsheba perched on the low couch, notebook in hand like she'd been there for hours. She had. Tonks stared. You said you wouldn't tell anyone, she muttered. Cassian, seated cross-legged on the desk like it was a throne, raised a hand. First of all, he said, you are in a male professor's private room. Tonks blinked. Then blinked again, as the implication properly landed. Oh. He gestured vaguely at the door. See? Headlines write themselves. Student in professor's quarters, ministry scandal or romantic subplot. She muttered something under her breath, either an apology or a curse. Second of all, he added, tipping his head toward Bathsheba, Professor Babbling was gracious enough to help, so we should thank her. Tonks crossed her arms. Why don't you just say you are scared of going behind her back? I am, Cassian said, cheerfully. That too. Bathsheba didn't say anything. Just sipped her tea and gave Tonks a slow once-over. Tonks shifted. So what is the plan? Am I going to sit on the floor and breathe until I stop turning into other people? Not unless your animagus form is a cushion, Cassian drawled. You are going to learn control. Like the rest of us. Only your muscle happens to be your face. She frowned. Not a great sales pitch. Not a great condition, he countered. You came to me. You want help, you get the full experience. That includes surprise supervision and unhelpful commentary. Tonks glanced between them, then let out a sigh and dropped onto the nearest chair. Fine. But if I start growing extra limbs, I am blaming both of you. That is fair, Bathsheba said, setting her cup down. Cassian clapped his hands together. Right. Let's get started. He got up, stretched the stiffness from his shoulders, and walked over to the worktable shoved against the far wall. Row of identical potions waiting, each marked with a neat Roman numeral on the neck. Bathsheba helped stabilize the brewing process last week, well she did most of it, really. He didn't know how to brew even the simplest potions, yet. Cassian picked up the first vial, then reached into a narrow wooden box tucked beside it. Inside, a careful row of tiny glass tubes, each sealed with wax and numbered. He plucked one out with 2 fingers. Tonks squinted. Wait, is that hair? Yes, Cassian mumbled without looking up. Not yours. Relax. Also not mine. Not hers either. She sat straighter. Whose, then? He popped the cork on the vial and tilted the glass tube to drop a single strand in. You see, I have this genius idea, shocking, I know. If you transform into someone else with polyjuice, and then try to morph back into yourself without waiting for the potion to wear off, you might start getting a grip on your default state. Train your muscle memory from the inside. Tonks stared. That sounds like a very clever way to die. Cassian grinned. Please. If this kills you, I will just tell the prophet you were trying to turn into a teacup. No one will question it. She groaned. You are the worst. Again, highly debatable. Now, listen. When the polyjuice kicks in, I want you to push your form back to your usual face. Not some random thing, not purple hair and a lopsided smile. You. Think of forcing your shape back to baseline while it is resisting you. Chapter 39, Serious. Bathsheba came to stand at the edge of the desk now, watching closely. Tonks took the potion with visible reluctance, staring down into the sludge. Cassian raised a brow. Problem. It smells like a damp sock, she muttered. It is not a cocktail, Tonks. Bottoms up. She downed it in one gulp, gagging halfway as her face twisted. The sound she made belonged to someone drinking sewage. Ugh. That is foul. Yes, well, so was the man whose hair you just swallowed. Let's see how you wear him. Tonks doubled over as the change hit, spine bowing forward. Her skin rippled. Shoulders broadened. Fingers stretched out longer, thicker. Her nose cracked slightly as it bent into a new shape. Whole process took 10, maybe 12 seconds, and then the chair was occupied by someone else entirely. Tall, gaunt, graying temples and narrow brown eyes. Cassian looked her up and down. Right then. Meet Fergus McNair. Lovely chap. Does wand maintenance in Nocturne. Bit of a limp. Why the hell would you pick him? Tonks asked, though now, the voice came in a low, almost graveled growl. Because he has very recognizable ears and bad posture. Should give you something to wrestle. She looked down at herself. This is wrong. My joints feel like they are on backwards. Cassian clapped. Perfect. Now try to undo it. Tonks scowled, or tried to. The borrowed face didn't quite get the expression right. She closed her eyes, sat stiff for a moment, then, her nose shrank, jaw pulled in, hair flickered blonde for a second before snapping back to graying. Nothing else moved. Bathsheba stepped forward. You are overcorrecting. You are trying to rewrite the entire body at once. Cassian nodded. Start with one thing. Your hand, maybe. Anchor yourself to it. Don't force it. Let it remember you. Tonks drew a sharp breath, focused on her right hand. For a moment, nothing. Then the fingers twitched, grew smaller, knuckles softening. The nails rounded back to her usual bitten tips. Her wrist followed, then the elbow jerked as though it didn't quite want to go. Cassian tilted his head. Keep going. She gritted her teeth and kept her focus locked on the sensation, until the right arm was hers again, but the rest of her looked like someone halfway through a bad transfiguration. It was clumsy. But it was working. Cassian gave a nod. Now hold it. Don't lose the hand. Tonks took another breath, went for the face. The McNair nose collapsed in on itself, then stretched sideways. She yelped, and her face half shifted into what looked like her mother's wedding portrait before snapping violently back into McNair. Cassian winced. All right, nope, stop. Pause. Bathsheba stepped in, a vial out. She fed it to her and Tonks slammed back into her own skin, literally. Her whole body jolted. She fell forward, caught herself on the desk. Bloody hell, she muttered, hair smoking slightly at the roots. That sucked. Good, Cassian nodded. Means it is doing something. Tonks didn't answer. Just sat there breathing heavily. Bathsheba handed her a glass of water. You did well. But don't push it. Cass, maybe don't give her McNair next time. Fine, he said. Next round she can be Dumbledore. She will sparkle. Tonks took the water and drained it in one go. Her hand still trembled. But the look she shot Cassian wasn't scared, it was hungry. You think this will work? She asked. Eventually. It is like any reflex. You train it enough, it stops fighting you. She nodded, still breathing hard, but steadier now. All right. Let's do it again. Cassian snorted. No. Sit. That was round 1. You will get more chances, don't worry. But unless you fancy permanently turning into Snape, we are spacing these out. Tonks flopped back into the chair and slumped. You know, she said, when I came in here, I thought you would laugh me out. Cassian snickered. Oh, I reserve the right to laugh at you. I just have too much pride not to fix it first. Tonks rolled her eyes and let her head flop against the back of the chair. You are the worst. Thank you. He tossed a scrap of parchment into the bin and missed by a heroic margin. Now drink your water before you pass out and I have to explain to Poppy why one of her wards smells like damp socks. Bathsheba went back to flipping through her notebook. Occasionally, she scribbled something in the margins, but whatever she was thinking didn't make it out loud. Tonks rubbed her temples. You know, I thought this would be like, some advice and a hug. Not forced potion therapy and amateur exorcism. Cassian reached over, plucked the empty glass from her hand. I doubt your mum refrains from giving you hugs. I met her once. Lovely woman. Gave you such a good name too. Tonks scowled, though her cheeks went a shade redder than usual. Shove off. He chuckled, setting the glass down. All right, that concludes the first session of, whatever this ends up being. Go on. Rest. You look like you've been steamrolled by your own bones. I feel like that too. And that, my little hatchling, is my reward. She shot him a look. It wasn't even angry, just tired, annoyed, and faintly betrayed. Oh, he added, lifting a finger, this whole thing? Highly illegal. Even the potion. Brewed in the dark, away from nosy portraits and nosier policies. Tonks straightened slightly. Wait, illegal. Do you know any other kind? That is not. She paused, then squinted. You are serious? Cassian raised an eyebrow. No, he is your uncle. I am Cassian. Try to keep up. She let out a groan and buried her face in her hands. I am going to get expelled. You won't, he said. Unless you brag about it in the common room, in which case, yes, and I will deny everything. Might even plant evidence that you were trying to steal my identity to smear the good name of Cassian Rosier. Then people will be shocked twice. Why twice? Because they will wonder why you assumed my name needed smearing in the first place. Bathsheba made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sigh, depending on how generous one was being. Just leave, please, Miss Tonks. He is babbling when he is excited. Cassian leaned in towards Tonks without missing a beat. She is trying to force me to take her last name. Both women rolled their eyes. Tonks didn't even dignify it with a response, just shoved herself up from the chair and walked out, muttering something under her breath that sounded suspiciously like a hex, minus the wand. The door clicked shut behind her. Cassian glanced at Bathsheba, eyebrows raised. You do realize she is going to try and turn herself into me now, right? Possibly by accident. Possibly out of spite. She would fail spectacularly, Bathsheba said, flipping her notebook closed. Your ego alone would snap her spine. That is fair. They repeated the process every other day. Sometimes skipped one when Bathsheba had 3 essays to kill and no will to revive them. Of the 3 of them, she was the only adult-shaped human in the room if things went sideways, and the only one who didn't think healing was synonymous with hope for the best. By the end of the month, Tonks could pull herself back together mid-polyuis like it was second nature. Quick breath, steady hands, and bam, her face was her own again. No beard, no backward ribs, no accidental Snape nose. Thank God. Cassian clapped after her last attempt. Look at that. All grown up. I am proud. Tonks, still panting, glared off without grace. Cassian turned, wandered to the shelf, and rattled through the vials. Right then. You mastered panic reflex. Now let's see if you can manage finesse. She groaned into her sleeves. No more vials. Please. I am still tasting the last one. Bathsheba didn't look up from her notes. You need water. Not whining. Tell her I deserve sympathy. She is right. You are dehydrated and dramatic. Pick one. Cassian whistled, pulling out a bottle with a deep green slosh and a number 7 scratched into the glass. Next task, young grasshopper. Transform into a new face while under duress. Same rules, less mercy. Tonks raised a brow. Do not call me that. Cassian wagged a finger in the air. You can either ban Nymphadora or young grasshopper. Choose wisely. You only get one. Tonks narrowed her eyes. You are lucky I haven't learned how to hex with my eyebrows. Give it a week, Cassian muttered, reaching for a hair. Since you are already familiar with MRS Tonks on a deeply personal and possibly traumatic level, we will use her. Tonks blinked, wary. Use her how? He held up the vial. Polyjuice. You drink this, you turn into someone else, random bloke, not her. But then, while your bones are doing the tango, I want you to use your own gift to shift back. Into your mum. Bathsheba glanced over the rim of her notebook. You are joking. I rarely do anything else, he puffed out his chest, unscrewing the lid with a little flourish. But no. This is serious. Don't. He raised his hand, catching the spark in her eyes. It is one thing to morph on cue, another to claw your way back when someone else is driving. Tonks stared at the potion. You are insane. Probably, he admitted with a thoughtful nod. But if this works, it will be because you forced your own identity through the mess. The human mind is stubborn. Even when wearing someone else's bones. She grudgingly accepted. Well, it took even longer. 2 months in, and Tonks still couldn't manage to pull herself into her mum's face while Polyjuice was dragging her into someone else's face. Returning to her own skin? Fine. A bit of focus, a lot of cursing, and she could snap back like a stubborn rubber band. But shifting into another specific person, especially while her biology was already hijacked, was a whole other mess. Felt like trying to balance a spinning plate on a broomstick. Blindfolded. Mid-earthquake. Cassian didn't push her. Not much, anyway. Bit of teasing, maybe. Bit of bait. But the training kept going. That was the night work. Daytime? Still had a job to do. A horde of bright-eyed little disasters to wrangle, essays to grade, and the occasional fire to stomp out, sometimes literal. 8 weeks in, Cassian finally got what he'd been working towards. Something shifted. It started with the usual, second years shouting over each other, arguing about which feather belonged to which owl before someone pointed out they were still inside and that was definitely a quill. Quickly dismissing them, and making it halfway through his room when something shifted. It wasn't flashy. No sparks, no thunderclaps. Just, a click. His magic stirred. Cassian blinked. Text scrolled across his vision, too fast to be mistaken. Ancient variant unlocked, Gravitas Ascendio. Chapter 40, Gravitas. Ancient variant unlocked, Gravitas Ascendio. Condition met. Gravitas Ascendio, older form of levitation magic. Draws object upward through gravitational displacement. Lingers mid-air until caster severs connection. Cassian raised an eyebrow. Here we go. He dropped onto the couch with a thud and slung one arm over the backrest like a man awaiting divine punishment. Then shut his eyes. Didn't help. It came instantly. No warning, no build-up. The room pulled sideways. Cold, damp air and the scratch of stone under his knees. Cassian opened his eyes into a thick darkness. Wherever he was, it smelled wet moss, rusted metal, and that sharp, mineral bite of old blood. The floor beneath was earth. His hands weren't his anymore. Fair, soft hands. The robe on his arms wasn't black. Brown, soft. Goat wool? He felt the sting before he knew what caused it. Sharp, across the back, like the air itself cracked open. He staggered forward. A whip. That was obvious. Either the host remembered or pain was universal. He moved forward, more like stumbled with the pain. No, the body didn't flinch. Just kept walking. A slave. Brilliant. He glanced down. Rope around the wrists, frayed, rubbed raw at the edges. Shackled, but lightly. There were others, walking ahead, line of bent backs and bent heads, all quiet except the ones who couldn't help crying. They didn't last long. Cassian didn't recognize the language of the cries. Something old. Southern. Could have been Akkadian, maybe even Proto-Arabic, if he squinted through 10,000 years of linguistic rot. Sounded rough, almost like stone grating on stone. The line stopped. Cassian stopped with it. Trying to look around. He learned that the hard way the last time his mind took a scenic detour through someone else's misery. Better to pay attention. Collect the clues. Write mental notes and hope he didn't vomit from the vertigo. They stood at the base of a stairway. Sloped stone, wide and worn, climbing up into a shadowed arch. He didn't have time to study it, another whip cracked. Someone shouted. Movement resumed. The host's head lifted a bit to catch a glimpse of a structure. Monolith. Cut straight into a cliff face. The entrance gaped like a mouth. Pillars flanked either side, carved with symbols that made Cassian's historian brain twitch. Another shove. Someone behind him reminded him to move. So he did. The corridor inside was dark. Chilly, damp, and narrow. Laborers. Dozens of them. Some older, some no older than second years. Faces thin, eyes sunken. A few wore nothing but ragged cloth at the waist. Compared to theirs, the host's robes were much better. Goatskin was probably silk of this time. Cassian stumbled a step, caught himself, and followed the rest of the line in. Everyone else dropped to their knees the second they passed into the chamber, some slow, some like their legs just gave out. It became clear he was the only one in the cavern who had any magic. The goatskin robe made more sense now. Cassian stepped closer to the altar. He raised both hands and spoke. Not anything modern. The words scraped the back of the throat. And still, even without knowing the exact tongue, Cassian recognized the structure. He could feel the spell underneath it. Gravitas Ascendio. Cassian didn't know why the interface gave him the Latin name. The spell rolling off his tongue now wasn't Latin. Wasn't even close. He tried to memorize whatever he could and moved. The slab in front of him, wide, solid, easily a ton of cut stone, began to rise. Clean off the ground like some invisible chain yanked it upward. It didn't even shudder or groan under the weight. The guards stepped in. 2 of them, robed in something darker and heavier than the others, moved around the edges of the monolith and pressed their palms to its corners. Together, they spin it. The stone spun mid-air. Freely. The altar might as well have been a feather the size of a house. Cassian's stomach twisted. This was the host's memory, the host's casting. But he felt the spell all the same. Felt how it worked, how it grabbed the world and told it to saw it off. One of the guards gestured up as people on the ground started to chant, "Wake, wake, wake, and heed my command." Cassian followed the motion. Overhead, built into the cavern ceiling, was a wide notch. Stone ribs braced it, 4 arms extending outward like the branches of a windmill. That's where it went. The spinning altar would be lifted up, slotted in, spinning while locked into place. The whole chamber was built for it. Cassian could feel the strain building now. Magic pouring out like a wire humming at full charge. A few more seconds and the spell would fray. Maybe drop the altar on someone's head. Maybe on his. He stepped forward, arms still raised. The altar climbed. Faster than before. Up, up, into the carved notch above. It fit. Not like 2 woods resting against each other, more like gears biting down. The massive altar didn't just float, it rotated, slotted neatly into the arms above like a key turning in a lock. The arms accepted it with a mechanical click that felt wrong for something made of rock. No grinding, no scrape. Just click, click, and settled. Cassian barely had a second to take it in before the air shifted. Light cracked across the seams of the stone. A breath of furnace dry heat slid through the chamber, fire without smoke, as if something old had just breathed. Lines lit up, runic etchings, old ones, the kind that weren't drawn so much as carved into existence. They burned gold, then flared bright as a sunburst before dimming to a soft pulse. A circuit. That was what it was. This whole chamber was a power grid, and the altar wasn't just furniture, it was a bloody engine. Cassian tried to move. His feet didn't cooperate. But his head snapped up, cathing the pattern again. The symbols weren't ornamental. They were aligned, rhythmic, humming in sync with the floating mass above. Wake, 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 and heed my command. He wanted to get closer, inspect the carvings, 6 of them looked Mesopotamian in style, but not quite. There were gaps. Corrections etched over older glyphs. Modifications, probably. Like someone had tried to improve an ancient enchantment by slapping on new parts without understanding what the old ones did. And it worked odd. That was the worst part. The bloody thing was active. Cassian tried to lean forward. He was so close, just needed to read one of the root runes. Figure out what branch it belonged to. The spell snapped. The chamber vanished. Cassian hit the floor of his room with a thud and a string of words that would have got him detention in every respectable institution from here to Gringotts. He groaned, rolled halfway onto his side, and pressed his forehead to the cool floorboards. He kept his eyes shut for a moment longer, like maybe the vision would drift back in if he prayed enough. Nothing. Ugh, he muttered, dragging himself upright by the desk. His limbs felt like someone else's, wobbly, too long, reluctant to cooperate. He groped around until his hand hit the edge of the table, then pawed over the mess until he found the right notebook. Not the one with the ancient rune mapping. Not the one with Tonk's therapy notes. Not the bloody map he was trying to decipher. The ratty green one with the broken spine and half a biscuit wedged between pages 13 and 14. He opened it. The biscuit crumbled. Goat's skin. Southern dialect, maybe Akkadian adjacent. Deep cave or constructed chamber. Gravitational lock spell system, gravitas ascendio used in ritual or sacrificial mechanism. Power matrix, altar equals rotor. Hybrid, magi tech. Maybe bloodbound. He paused, tapping the side of the pen against his temple. Bit of ash in the air. Definitely felt sacrificial. But no obvious offering. Unless the spell itself was draining them. That thought sat wrong. He underlined it twice and scribbled a quick note beside, spiritual displacement? Who is paying the cost? Another scribble. Could be linked to place-based enchantment. Carvings not decorative. Actual bloody framework. Symbols overlaid, new script on top of older base system. Almost like someone took a Mesopotamian curse matrix and stapled a charging rune on top. Who does that? He sighed, squinting at the sketch he butchered for the 5th time. The runes were vague. Whatever the reason, they wouldn't hold still in his memory long enough to draw properly. Might have been a blessing. Because the theory brewing in the back of his head? Nasty business. If he was right, that altar wasn't just for lifting stone. At least he got something useful out of it. Gravitas Ascendio. Sounded like a fancy way to say up you go, but the mechanics underneath? Different beast entirely. Not standard levitation, more like bending the field itself. Efficient. Dangerous. Very much not ministry approved. He would need to test it properly, see if the thing could hold weight or just throw it. And it came with a warning label stamped straight into his skull. Whatever that place was, whoever that memory belonged to, it wasn't ceremonial. That altar didn't rise for show. It clicked into something. Powered it. And the people who built it knew exactly what they were fueling. Cassian rubbed the bridge of his nose, feeling throbbing behind his eyelids. His mind felt sluggish. When Christmas arrived, Tonks still hadn't managed to turn into her mum while under the effects of polyjuice. Bit of a letdown, considering the 3 months of damp sock-flavored trauma she choked down. But with school breaking up and no miracle morph on the horizon, she packed up her trunk, hugged Bath's Hato with genuine affection, and gave Cassian a look that promised at least one prank if her eyebrows grew back crooked. "Enjoy the holidays," he told her, ruffling her hair. "Choke on a pine cone," she replied sweetly, and took the train the next morning. That left Cassian with 2 options: spend the holidays trapped in Rosier Manor with the family equivalent of a tax audit, or do literally anything else. He took the second option. Of course.
Thanks for listening.